Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this November 20th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee to order. Looking for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none, we can move on to consent items. Colleagues, item number 3 has a replacement page for page 51 as there was a couple of typos on it. There's been a request to postpone number 4 to a future meeting where we can have a signed site plan agreement accompany that. So I'd look to colleagues for a motion to postpone number 4. Are there any other items anyone would like to have pulled from consent? Alrighty, seeing none, we can take a motion on the balance except 4. Right, any comments on any of the consent items? Councillor Turner and Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just with respect to the State of the Downtown report, in the appendix, it has some numbers regarding specifically the level C business properties and the vacancy rates associated with those. There was a significant increase. So everything else, so the A, Bs, and Cs or the A's and Bs are relatively static. The Cs, however, jump fairly significantly from about 22.6% to about 30.6%, and have just since 2011 jumped from 13%. I was wondering if there might be any commentary on that specifically. One, if the creation of new space in Class A might create some migration from C into A, or if there's any other land holding, land assembly, those kind of things that might impact that, that fairly sharp increase in vacancy.
Mr. Yanchula?
We don't actually track, we don't drill down into the numbers that deeply, so we wouldn't be able to do that. Anything I would tell you would be speculative. We do know that there's an uptick in the Class A space take-up, but that can be because people are moving around, or it can be that new people are coming from other parts of the city into downtown in Class A space, or are new startups, or are moving around. So we have the numbers, but we don't have the rationale behind the numbers. That would be analytics that we would get from CBRE or somebody who provides us that data.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Yanchula. I figured this was probably a little deeper of a question. It's one that I think we should keep our eye on. It's a trend that is a little concerning, especially if Class C ends up being some of our heritage buildings and things like that, where there's a point to that as well.
Right. So one of the things that was recognized by council during the analysis of the incentive programs was to increase the value of the incentives for heritage designated properties. So if more properties are Part 4 designated downtown, that could help in that. It's all designated in Part 5, but if there's a way to have more civic help for that now than there was before. So it's great that you're noting that the heritage stock is the stock that is generally a B or C class, and you also are taking steps that you can take to address some of the potential take up there. So we have tools, we have to have willing owners.
Thank you. So no, I appreciate that, and I raise it for my colleagues and for staff as well, because I think this could be one of those risk areas for us in years to come. And if there's a policy perspective that we might be wishing to take as council, it would be helpful for us to have a sense of what the drivers are. So if there's an opportunity in the future, I think that would be really helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Helmer on the speakers list next.
Okay, on a couple of these items, first on number 3, appreciate the report. I know it's retrospective in nature. And I wonder if there's any ability to get the report more quickly. When I was thinking back on, the State of the Downtown in 2015, it's kind of interesting, but I might have wanted to know some of these things earlier as we're making decisions about what's going on downtown. And I just wonder what the realistic time frame is from the close of the end of the year 2015 to sort of what is the soonest we could get our hands on this kind of report.
Mr. Anchula?
This is an anomaly in our reporting. Usually we are much more timely, but we had staffing issues in 2015 that had a backlog of, we had to do the priority A stuff before we could get to the priority C stuff. Normally we're right on top of it. In fact, thanks for asking, we developed this State of the Downtown report so that the look and feel is kind of sets a new threshold of how the future ones are going to go. So the template is set. We've been collecting all kinds of data. We just had to keep the 2014 and 15 data together, and we'll have the 2016 and 17 data, which we already have, ready to go much earlier next time. So in 2018, we should expect to see the 2017 biennial report, and then we'll be all caught up.
Anything further?
Yeah, not on that report, but thank you for that, Mr. Yanchula. On item number 6, property tax assistance bylaw for McCormick Villages, I'm certainly glad to see that coming forward. I know it was part of the earlier resolution we passed at council in terms of the brownfield and the redevelopment of that site, which is obviously crucial for the city and Ward 4. So glad to see that coming forward. On item number 12, again, I'd just like to say thank you very much to both the applicant and our staff for working on that subdivision, finding some opportunities to increase the views into those natural heritage areas, and doing it very quickly, frankly. I know in the discussion, there was some concern that we've already looked at this and there's not gonna be many opportunities. Also that it might take a long time to get back to us, and frankly, neither of those things proved to be true. It got back very quickly, and there were a couple of things that could be done, I think relatively small changes that have improved the overall subdivision, so I'm really glad to see that. And then on item number 13, again, I feel like a bit of a broken record, but I mean, this is another tremendous year for building activity. We're almost at $1 billion in construction activity by the end of September, which, you know, is just barely trailing the record-setting year last year. So to our staff in the building division, you know, thank you for keeping up with the deluge. I did have one question about it, where you see in the report that the threshold for responding to within 48 hours, this is one of the lower numbers I've seen, you know, 84%. And I wonder if that has stayed the same into October, or if we've recovered from that and got closer to the numbers we're used to seeing.
Through the chair, we haven't quite finalized the October numbers yet, but I have a suspicion it's going to be pretty much close to what you see here already for September, with maybe a minor improvement.
Anything further? Okay. Mayor Brown and then Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I wanted to speak about item 3, of course, the State of the Downtown report. I wanted to make sure that I cleared my schedule to be here for this report because it really is good news. And I think it's important to stop and recognize when we see some metrics that, although they're a little bit dated, as Councillor Helmer pointed out, really reiterate that we're on the right track. I mean, this is so much a part of our London plan. It's so much a part of our vision for the community that that I do think it's important to stop, and even when you see a consent item like this, and recognize that good work is happening. Significant investments are being made as well. And it's not just the city. The city is working together with a number of community partners. Downtown London is here today, and the report highlights the kind of dollars that they're putting into the downtown as well, and they should be applauded for that. In 2018, as I was reading this report, I'm looking forward to seeing one of the areas that they have made significant investments in, bringing Fanshawe College, 1,600 more students downtown, and we'll be looking at that in September of 2018. And that couldn't have happened if we weren't all working together. And so, great report. Highlights that our downtown is our economic engine, way less than 1% of our geography, well over 5% of taxes collected. And I think we all need to remember that when downtown grows and when downtown is strong, our entire community is as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to, I don't want to repeat everything that's already been said, but I think we as a council need to do a better job of really crowing about the downtown and the building report, both of those things. It's important for the public to see, because the media likes to report the negative stuff. So it's really important for the public to see these positive stories. And especially when you look at the retail vacancy, how it's come down over the years. So I'm glad Councillor Helmer brought up the timeliness of this report, because a lot of people that say things like, boarded up buildings downtown and things like that. And they're obviously not aware of the retail vacancy rate and how it's come down over the years and how our downtown is growing and thriving. And again, how that is good for everybody in the city. When I talk to my constituents in Ward 5, and they'll say things like, well, I never go downtown. I try to educate them on why a healthy downtown is good for them in particular and good for London in general. So I also want to say the staffing issues, I believe that have been going on in building division, the fact that you still have achieved that kind of response rate, you should be commended for that because I know you've been under a lot of strain and pressure. So good for you and keep up the good work in both divisions. Thanks.
Any further speakers? Seeing none from the chair, I'd want to make a comment about how much optimism there is with the next downtown report coming along. There's been a lot of headway there. Downtown London received another Pinnacle Award for their work that they've done to bring Fanshawe into the Kings Mills building, so stay tuned, everybody. It's going to be a good report. So, and I'll call the question on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, everyone. And with item number 4, I wonder if someone would make a motion to postpone to a future meeting. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. And it's been seconded. Any speakers on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, colleagues, with item number 14, we've just received word that the chair of Latch cannot be here until 6:30. Unfortunately, he had a work conflict and couldn't be here for 4 o'clock. So I wonder if we can send an alert to him that he should come still for 6:30, or should we proceed? I'll look to the committee for any comment on that. Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, looking at the agenda, I don't anticipate us going to that point in time. He may not be able to present. So I think we could hold it and postpone, but or for further in this meeting. But I don't think there's an opportunity for him to get here before 6:30, and I don't think we're going to be that long. Famous last words.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Turner. So someone could put number 14 on the floor, and perhaps staff could address any questions that committee has. Okay. We'll just wait and to see if the committee has any questions. So there's been the added report from the last meeting of the Latch regarding the property at 100 Stanley Street. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I was looking for a sense of the tone of the discussion with respect to 100 Stanley. The committee's reception to the proposal to relocate across the street for the building. I recognize that they state it's not the preferred option, but were they open to the suggestion for the ability to retain the asset?
I acknowledge that the project manager, Mr. McCray, is here as well, so you might want more than one perspective on that tone of the discussion. But Latch was, first of all, very complimentary at the quality of the information that they received by the undertakings of a heritage impact assessment and the cultural heritage evaluation report. They did note that they had the details that they were looking for. When it came down to stating what they stood for, the discussion was that they wouldn't move off of their first preference. But I think that it would be fair to characterize the remarks about moving as one that they could tolerate or abide or something like that, recognizing it was by far not their first preference.
Any other questions from committee on that item? I wonder if Mr. McCray could answer a question for me. I know at the meeting itself, there was a lot of questions about whether the Warncliffe Road widening was the crux of why this is moving forward, or did it have to do with the bridge itself and the limitations and constraints that CN has put on to the city with regarding how this whole project needs to work out at that area.
Madam Chair, you are correct that regardless of the road configuration, it's really the replacement of the bridge and the complexities therein that dictate the impacts to 100 Stanley Street. CN's requirement to keep the rail line active, and that's a standard requirement on all rail grade separation projects, necessitates a certain construction methodology that dictates that the new abutments for the new bridge be located behind the existing abutments. So that really fixes everything else, fixes the location of the abutments, the construction zone, and where construction equipment needs to be placed and all the temporary works. So yes, it's more the replacement of the bridge than the exact configuration of the lanes on the road that dictates the impacts.
Thank you very much. And from the chair on that, I appreciate all of that information. And I think this recommendation that's come forward to the Latch is a huge olive branch that the city is offering. And I think that when we get down to the road on making a decision there, it'll be very difficult for council, but I think that we've come a long way on that. Procedurally, should this go to Civic Works Committee then? Or how should that work? This recommendation from Latch. Just curious what we do procedurally with that.
The return to Latch was out of courtesy, and it was an information report, and it was deemed appropriate because Latch had expressed an interest in the project. However, it is part of a larger project that's going through an environmental assessment. It's part of the project obligations of the Environmental Assessment Act. There has been prior reports on this project to Civic Works Committee, the last of which were in November 2016. So in consideration, considering this item under the context of the full project would be appropriate, and it's planned to bring the environmental study report for the project to Civic Works Committee in the new year.
That's great. Thanks very much. Any further speakers? Okay. Seeing none, we can call a question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, item number 15.
Nope,
Pardon me.
Um, 17, 18.
All right, so we're ahead of ourselves here. So we can move on to item number 17, the staff report for Dundas Place Management. And I believe there's a presentation coming with that. Yeah, absolutely. So the individuals who are for item 15 and 16, they're timed items, and we are quite ahead of ourselves, so we're just going to jump down to the agenda to fill the time. Count.
All right, thank you. This is an overview of your report on Dundas Place Management. I'd remind you that Dundas Place is it's the blocks between the river and Wellington Street. These are the ones that are to be transformed from their current status as a street to their envisioned status as a place. We had an open house on November 9th at the library that gave the most up-to-date actual realizations or visualizations of what is intended for the use of the space. So those who attended it would have seen its configuration if the road were closed for a summertime event, as well as remembering that this is an all-season opportunity, that it would also be available to be configured when the road is closed to vehicular traffic for events in what we would call the off-season, winter. Keeping in mind that Dundas Place is still intended to be a vehicularly traveled path for whenever there isn't something that requires the full extent of Dundas Place to be closed off in the future, or perhaps not even, maybe one segment at a time. Where did this all come from? Just a quick refresher for those who might be watching on the internet or elsewhere. First, from the scoping study that was done for Dundas Place, recognized that having an investment made in event programming was going to be important to the overall success of the space. That was brought forth when we adopted the London Downtown Plan, our Move Forward. Our Move Forward set out that Dundas Street in Transformational Project 1 was to be make Dundas Street the most exciting place in London. So that's where that street place thing came from in the first place. And in the our Move Forward, the mechanism to do so was a combination of the capital investment in changing the configuration or the construction of the street, as well as the ongoing maintenance operation for a first-class facility. Then that information fed into the environmental study report that also recognized that this was a holistic project and that maintaining what we have into the future and animating it was important. And so the public had a chance to weigh in on those aspects of the report when the environmental study was being completed. Which leads us to where we are now, to prepare the budget amendment form that will be referred to the budget process if you accept the recommendation before you tonight, which acknowledges that we are aiming for a first-class physical space, and in what is equally as critical is the amount of attention that we can spend to keeping it lively and animated. This all comes from somewhere, a place management model. Place management, whether it's commonly known or not, is an actual activity that people do. And the typical place management model is the intersection of the activities that involve activation, the activities that involve maintenance, and the activities that involve security, all at the same time, all in a specific destination, which is different than a systems model, which says, we have a line of work that is maintenance, we have a line of work that is security, we have a line of work that is activation, and if they intersect, that's great, but they're not designed to do that. Place management is designed to do that. And of course, we have experience of that on interiors, in buildings. The success of Budweiser Gardens, the success of Covent Garden Market, the success of the London Convention Center are all equally relatable to how they're managed and not just the fact that we built them. So from an outside-in point of view, place management is fairly well accepted. But it's becoming more accepted from an inside-out point of view as well. So we have looked at Canadian precedents and how they manage these spaces that are civic rights-of-way in what we could find for comparables. And every one is idiosyncratic to the community that they're in and how they do that. But what is so is that there are management models for Spark Street in Ottawa, City Square in Regina, Stephen Avenue in Calgary, and Yonge Dundas Square in Toronto. So based on multiple discussions with people who do the day-to-day work in those locations especially, and looking at how London is set up and what we believe to be the best way forward in setting out a pilot project on how to manage Dundas Place, we set up a governance model that you see in your report. The governance model sets this up as City Council providing funding and direction on how to use this new capital investment. It's an experiment, as I say. I don't want it to sound that that means that we have no plan for this. It's just that we have to learn as we go, the way that Spark Street has learned as it went, and Calgary and so forth, on how to best keep our civic investment in this outdoor Bud Gardens, if you will, as a top-notch place in London. So what you see before you is a governance model that illustrates the structure of decision-making and how funding would flow from City Council through some direction to the core area steering committee that would then be operationalized through the Main Street London organization, which is a city plus London Downtown Business Association organization that would supervise the day-to-day activities of the Dundas Place manager once what that person is supposed to do has been figured out. So the governance model is different than the operational model. You'll notice the governance model is very vertically oriented and the operational model is more horizontally distributed because we are learning. The Dundas Place manager in this operational model is set as the fulcrum or go-between point for all of the agencies and interests that would feed through to having something happen on Dundas Place in terms of maintenance, activation, and security. And then from the other side, the core area steering committee through Main Street London, weighing what happens from the inputs on the right to the supervision on the left. This is something that over the next 2 years, according to the budget amendment that we've proposed to you, would be able to test out in reality and see how that model goes. One of the things that we learned in developing the operational model that was of concern to all of the partners that you see listed is sort of who calls the shots. And this in no way is meant to be taking anything away from the reporting relationships that already exist for things that the city already does. The purpose of the Dundas Place manager is that this, in order to be successful, can't be something that's off the side of the desk for one or the other departments in the city. There has to be somewhere where it can be put together. So the operational word there is coordination. It's not direction, it's coordinating. So in terms of coordinating activation, it's that the Dundas Place manager knows when something has to happen, there's an emergency that's happening, their cell phone is the one that somebody's gonna call to say, hey, we just had an incident here, we have to close the street, please get the people who close the street to do that, or something like that. In terms of maintenance, it's if we establish that there's going to be a power washing schedule, that making sure that we're not power washing in the middle of a parade or something like that. You'd be surprised that, you know, left and right don't always talk to each other, and things that could be avoided with somebody being responsible for it can be reduced. Perhaps not eliminated, but certainly reduced. And certainly for security, if there's extra security that is needed for special events, in the example of coordinating security, the Dundas Place manager certainly isn't going to be part of the London Police Service, but it may have to coordinate with the London Police Service if there's extra contract security for a special event. If Justin Bieber comes to town and wants to be on Dundas Place, it may be important for the Dundas Place manager to know that ahead of time to help. These are just examples of the kinds of security, or sorry, the kinds of coordination that we're contemplating. So there is, in our view, based on the research that we did from cities that already have place management models, a real need for a Dundas Place manager that we hope we've been able to express in the written report before you. The other component in the written report has to do with the idea of a field house. This is a term that was used from how parks are operated. There's always a place in a major park where the stuff is stored, or you know, sometimes there's a washroom facility in it or something. It's a great outdoor space, just like we hope Dundas Place will be a great outdoor space, but there needs to be a place pretty much on site where you can bring things to and take things from in order for it to be operationally efficient. It is also possible that you could put things on a flatbed truck and drive it to the edge of the city or some storage facility, but it really reduces the spontaneity that we hope these 4 blocks of Dundas Place can become known for. So we are looking for a place that can be the backstage if there's a concert on, or somewhere where people have to change costumes for a second act. It would be a place for where do you store the chess and checkers sets on a daily basis? Where do you put the tables that come out and go back at nighttime? Somebody somewhere on or near Dundas Place is the best for it. So we've set aside a line item in the funding to be able to support a place that would be able to do that and increase the odds of success for the management of Dundas Place. So in the high-level overview of what's in your report before you, that's the presentation that I made. The actual recommendation is put together in the 5 segments that you see there because we feel that all of these are important components to it. So if there's something that you have a specific question about that, I'll just leave that on the screen as you debate.
One thing, just to summarize what Mr. Yanchula, I think, is very effectively laid out. You might recall that you as a council set up a core area steering committee, and that is made up of senior leadership team members. And this was, in fact, I believe the first time that across the board, the senior leadership team is sitting on a group that are focused on the downtown and what needs to happen in order to get to that downtown revitalization that everybody's looking for. This is absolutely, we see as something that's absolutely critical. Through the Flex Street, that capital project is creating a canvas, but it is so critical that there's somebody there to paint that canvas every day. And by painting the canvas, I mean that activation, making sure that the merchants are putting on sidewalk sales or spilling out with their cafes and restaurant spaces, that people are putting out planters and activating the street in that way, that there are programming, whether it's buskers or other types of events, and also that the bollards are coming up, coming down, as Mr. Yanchula said, that the maintenance is working effectively. So I just want to point out this piece is really critical to take that investment that council's put on the street and turn it into something that really is effective.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. So I'd look to the committee, and it looks like I have Councillor Park right at the top.
Well, thank you very much. I remember a year ago when I moved a couple motions. One's about the core steering committee coming together, and 2 is about the management of Dundas Place. And if you look back to way back when Centennial Hall was created, pardon me, I want to say the BUD, but back when it was the John Labatt Center, management was the critical piece to that. You can't have a shop without having it managed. And I think that this way to go about it is the right way. I know as a board member of Downtown London, the relationships created between the Bud Gardens, the Convention Center, and the Grand Theatre, it's all come together about the different models that can come to play about managing a space. And I think that Downtown London is well positioned to dovetail all those relationships together so that we really do have spectacular activization happening in these spaces. And Mr. Yanchula, you said it just as I was writing it down. This certainly cannot be side of desk work. As someone who's worked in the arts industry, I've seen what happens when it becomes side of desk work. It's not a success. And I can say that going forward with this, in my view, is the most bang for our buck going forward. And you talked about a good relationship with the police services, and Downtown London has just that, a really remarkable relationship with LPS. So I'm very supportive of this, and I look forward to the future debate on this. But again, I don't think we can hammer home enough how critical a piece this is to the operation of Dundas Place, and how integral it is to make sure that the second that street's open, we're open for business, making sure that we have people on the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for the presentation. And without a doubt, Dundas Place is an exciting, will be an exciting place, I hope, and the investment that we've already put into it needs to be managed somehow. And I guess one of my questions I do have to staff is the coordination. That was one word that I heard loud and clear, and trying to understand how that coordination is going to work. And the comment about it's still going to be open to vehicle traffic, but yet we want to be able to close it off for our events and to create an environment to keep it lively. So just trying to understand whose responsibility will that be for the coordination? Given that the city does own the infrastructure, would it not be the city's responsibility? And just wanting to understand who makes those decisions, that we're gonna close it off now and it's gonna be, obviously that's all gonna be coordinated in time, but just that responsibility, who ultimately is in charge?
That was the popular question from all of the service areas when we were intersecting our different spheres of responsibility to be able to come to a conclusion. I think what we are aiming to do with the Dundas Place manager in terms of this pilot period for the next year and a half or 2 years is to create an operations manual that answers those questions. The physical person who closes a street is still run through the transportation division. There's a whole bunch of requirements that have to be met in order to be able to close a street. The Dundas Place manager could add value, though, for understanding what is the forecast frequency of street closures, and when does it not make sense anymore if you're really successful in your programming to say, okay, somebody wants to close the street this weekend and somebody wants to close the street 2 and 3 and 4 weekends from now. Does it make sense to keep it open in the middle weekend or not? So having a game plan, the way that I'll again use the example of a convention center or Bud Gardens, they'll know their bookings. They'll look ahead and they'll say, okay, this is what we know is coming now. This is what we need to prepare ourselves for. What are all the operational things that can happen? So I don't imagine that the Dundas Place manager, in my conception of their job, is going to go and place a bollard in or take a bollard out, but they will certainly be able to tell either on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis after an operations protocol has been developed for the people who do that work to know to come and achieve just the simple, not so simple actually, but the required methods of closing a street to vehicular traffic and still keeping it open for emergency vehicles and all those sorts of things. In the case of trash collection, it would be similar. That I don't see the Dundas Place manager going around and emptying trash bins, but knowing when not to do it or knowing when the trash has to be removed for the next thing to happen would be part of the coordination effort that would come from knowing what is happening along this street that needs this activity. So if it needs to happen more frequently, there's a line item that you'll notice in your proposed budget amendment that provides for an increased frequency of service. We have anticipated a quantum for that. We're going to experiment and see how well we do with it, but it would have to be in relationship to what's going on anyway. So understanding that first, and then taking and making that Dundas Place manager knows, not me in the planning department or somebody in the parks department or some other person who has 10 other things that they are responsible for. It's the Dundas Place manager who would be responsible for. And also feedback. You know, that's the other thing. We are going to keep track of what's going on. We're going to figure out a way to do that so that we know what works and what doesn't, what in terms of operation, in terms of timeliness, in terms of dissatisfaction. That's, to me, where the coordination comes from. So it's not about doing the work, it's coordinating the work. I probably a long answer to a short question. I'm prone to that, and I'm sorry.
I appreciate your comments. And again, getting back to that coordination I hear over and over again is going to be really important. And ultimately, we'll sort of see how this will roll out. I was curious to know if other cities manage their open areas or places themselves, or do they, I know you presented a few cities that have these committees, but is it usually seen as something that the city is not sort of in charge of?
Again, there is that, the in charge of is hard in a space that is also a route. So it's different if it's a park because it's not meant to do anything else but be a destination in and of itself. There is no requirement for vehicles to go through it. But in the ones that we looked at, if you look at Calgary, for example, in the Stephen Avenue Mall, it arguably is well known beyond Calgary as a place in the heart of Calgary to go and visit. the city of Calgary participates with funding to the Downtown Calgary organization to provide for the increased cleanliness and security that is achieved there, but it's managed by that arm's length business organization, and that seems to work in Calgary. I don't know that it is a direct model for us ourselves, but when you ask, does the city call the shots? In that case, the person with the gold makes the golden rules, sort of thing. In terms of Spark Street, they've had some, and you'll see it in published reports if you do your own web surfing, issues around the governance of Spark Street and where they have to intersect with the City of London versus the Downtown Business Organization, and they finally sorted those things out and learned from it. But if you've gone to Spark Street, like I had the ability to do so a couple of years ago, and they've got big Muskoka chairs out on Spark Street, and they've got, they roll out fake grass, and they put up umbrellas, and all of a sudden it's animated. So in that case, it's the Spark Street Mall Authority that has a blend of businesses and city officials on it to have those kinds of things happen. It's merged territory. It's sort of fuzzy borders. It's learning as you go kind of stuff. So those are two examples I'm personally familiar with. Regina's struggling through with their city plaza because they didn't have somebody whose job it was. It was all kind of being run out of the Public Works Department, and it created a lot of consternation because in their case, they had a street that goes like sort of right where their version of Victoria Park is, and it would be like people never knew if they could go through it or not go through it. So it created negative feedback from the users who were inconvenienced by the animation of the space. In all cases, the short answer to the short question is the city is involved but shares the responsibility.
Thank you, and if I may, just one last quick question. And again, I know, it's going to take some time for this to unfold, but if I did, as a councillor, receive a call or a complaint, how do you sort of ideally see this, if we implement this model, how that would unfold? Who gets the complaint?
Well, I'm hoping that when the terms of reference for the position are confirmed by the Core Area Steering Committee, that would be one of the things that we would look at so that we would know where the buck stops. But I think always the initial place has to be with the person who's responsible, whose name is kind of on the space. If you had a problem with London Convention Center, you'd call the London Convention Center and you'd probably end up talking to Lori or somebody on her staff. In my view, that point of constant contact where we can log what people love and what people hate in one place is where I would expect it to go, but only with the concurrence of how, Scott Stafford's staff feels how that goes, or Kelly's staff feels how that goes. You've asked me my personal opinion, that's how I would see it happening.
If I could just add to that, I think that's exactly right. And now with the core area coordinating team, so that is representatives from across the corporation at the management level, below the senior leadership team group, they'd be able to coordinate with this person. So this person could then take the complaint and either activate themselves or speak to the core area coordinating team that could then provide a coordinated response. And if there's some action that's required, it's a coordinated action. It's something that everybody across the entire organization is on board with.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Next on the list, I've got Mayor Brown and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's got to feel good today when you bring a report like this forward, and maybe it'll feel better assuming that it passes through committee and council. But it's got to feel good because this is a vision that's becoming a reality. And we're now getting down to the point where we can talk about implementation. And I'm so excited about it, personally. I want to thank Councillor Park for her leadership on this over the course of this term, as well as the councillor that represents the downtown. I do want to recognize the kind of focus that you've had on this to get us to this point. We've talked about it for years and years, that this is the living room for all Londoners, and we have to make significant investments to see our vision come to fruition. But it's not just in capital costs. And I know you've made that clear through your reports in the past, and I know that you used the analogy of really the capital costs, create that canvas, and now it's up to us to make an investment in the paint and in the art and in the follow-through. There's no question in my mind that we can do this. We've done a lot of one-off opportunities, whether it's through Culture Days or whether it was through Sesquifest and the Canada 150 celebrations. But when you watch those very successful events take place, you can see the kind of strain that it's placing on everyone involved in making it happen, because people really are working off the side of their desk in many cases. And for this to be sustainable, we absolutely have to make an operating budget investment as well. And so I'm going to be happy to support this. And I have to say, it's extremely exciting to see these plans, this vision, this dream come forward. We saw a report earlier today that talks about how downtown is improving. It's from significant previous investments from the private sector, from past councils. This is our opportunity to make another extremely important investment so this trend can continue. So I'll be happy to move the motion when it comes up on screen. And I'm looking forward to seeing those shovels go in the ground in 2018 and seeing events taking place soon after that. I'm also looking forward to seeing the buses off of Dundas Street. That'll come hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. And my question to you, Madam Chair, to staff, there's two. One, just looking at the budget for this person, $75,000 to $100,000, I think was up there. Do we really think that this is going to be a full-time job? Because that seems like what we're budgeting for, and I wonder if that's the case for just, for Dundas Street. I see them being very busy sometimes, but I wonder if they'll be busy all the time. So perhaps you could fill us in on some of the other things that they might be doing if there's no events going on for 6 months over the summer or over the winter, perhaps. And my other question is, how will the person be resourced? I remember back when we were looking at the budget for Dundas Street, a couple things had come up, and one was the potential to put some money for experimenting with programming, and seems to me this person might need to have some resources like that as well. So perhaps you could talk about the dollars for me.
Okay, so yes, it's a full-time position that's envisioned. It's in the 2018 budget. It wouldn't be 12 months, because if this goes through, by the time we get approval to have the position and recruit for the position, it's unlikely that they won't be there January 1, 2018 if all goes well. So there's a prorated aspect to the value for that. And the quantum isn't all salary dollars. So the resources that come with the position, because you're going to have to fit them out. They're going to need a phone. They're going to need a computer. Those kinds of things are part and parcel of the quantum that we put in the budget for the position. We feel that it's relatively modest in terms of what we would do, because we are in a amendment to the current budget. So we are recognizing that it'd be nice to have something all the way through, but we're trying to take our steps deliberately and carefully at the beginning so that we learn from them and know what we really need in the next 4-year budget cycle. Or if it should all, for some unfortunate reason, explode in our face, that we're not pre-committing to anything beyond that as well. So yes, full-time, part of the quantum that you see there covers those kinds of office-related resources. And then we have the cooperation of Main Street London through the Downtown London organization in terms of having a space for them to live in for 2 years and work from. Will they be busy the whole time, you asked? definitely, from all of our experience with contacting our colleagues in the 4 Canadian cities, and we also talked to people in Cincinnati and Detroit as well, they'll be beyond busy. What they do when they're not organizing or overseeing is tracking. That's one of the most important things here. So on page 291 of your agenda, the draft job description, the few bullets at the top that are the general provisions about overseeing the annual review of policies and procedures, the questions that Councillor Hopkins was asking about, how will we know? Who will set up the calendar? Who will take these things in? That, in my view, is the Dundas Place manager. What are the measures that we're going to use to make sure that these things happen? Number of people of events, how are we going to count the number of people of event? At the events. Number of activations that happen without anybody having to ask for them by virtue of the extended sidewalks that we will be constructing on Dundas Street. Keep in mind, we won't always have to close the street for something cool to be happening along the street, but we should be monitoring what's happening, because if the inside and the outside aren't working together and we're only concentrating on the outside because that's our territory, we'll only be achieving half of the potential benefit that we might have. So from our research and the contacts that we've made with people who already have these kinds of positions, we're pretty confident that it's going to be beyond the full-time job, just hoping we can attract somebody who's got the guts to do it.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps my last question then, are we looking to import some particular skill sets for this job?
So the skills are at the top of page 292 there, and I think the people who already are used to coordinating public activities, event organizers are probably good if they've dealt with security and budgets, but it's the tracking stuff, real numbers that we can base real decisions on in the future that they also should be able to do. Importing, I don't know if, I'm not sure what you mean by the importing. This person could be on somebody from outside of London. It could be somebody who's already working in an organization in London. Because it's a 2-year term that we would be advertising for, we recognize that there's going to be some people who would be interested in taking 2 years at a shot of doing something, and other people will say, well, maybe if it's permanent, I would, but otherwise I'm not going to leave my day job, so.
I'll just add to that, through you, Madam Chair, that on the bottom of 291 are the qualifications, and one of them is some significant experience with the operation of this kind of activity and taking a leadership role in this kind of activity.
Any further speakers? Councillor Helmer?
So off the top, I want to say that I think it's smart to have somebody in charge of it, and I think the Dundas Place manager is a good idea. You have the benefit or not of being the first business case to come forward. So I have some questions about that. I'm trying to understand the maintenance and security costs in the context of this being a place. So I get the idea that, you know, you need to spend money to maintain it at a different standard than other roadways and sidewalks in the city. But I was trying to think about it more like a park. You know, like it's a certain linear kind of public space, and like it has a certain kind of area, and you have sort of operating costs by area that you think you could kind of compare against other kinds of things that have maintenance and repair budgets. So when I thought about it that way, I have to tell you the costs seem like extremely high. So at first I just want to check some of my assumptions because I had to measure these things myself. So I don't know if they're actually right. So we're talking about 750 meters, right? Of roadway and sidewalk, like, so 1,500 lane kilometers or whatever of both of those things. And it's maybe 18 or 19 meters wide. I don't know how wide it is, but it's probably something like that. Is that all right? And feel free if the transportation people want to jump in, they probably know the.
Those numbers sound pretty good. It's a 20-meter wide right away.
Okay, 20 meters. Okay, so basically we're talking about 150,000 square feet of roadway and sidewalk, like 750 meters by 20 meters. It's a pretty big area, and so you think, okay, well, you're gonna have a fair amount of cost if you're gonna do snow removal and maintenance and all of those things, security in a space like that. It's outdoor space, and I don't really have a lot to compare it to, but if it's something in the order of that, 150,000 square meters, we're talking like something like $550 per like lane meter of sidewalk or road, just for the maintenance part. That's a lot. Like, that's way more. Like, we spend like $3,000 for snow removal per kilometer of roadway. So, you know, it seems like a really, really high amount. And then on top of that, you've got the security part and the administration part for the field house, which is, you know, it said in the report that we're gonna rent this space. So how sure are we that this is really what is required? Because the maintenance costs of, you know, in the sort of fully operational phase of Dundas Place, $800,000, that's pretty similar to like the heated sidewalk where we were like, nope, you know, like, we're not gonna do the heated sidewalk, it's really too expensive operationally. And I think if we had these numbers around the operational costs of maintenance, I mean, maybe we would have, you know, if the snow removal and all the things that we're gonna have to do in this space are gonna be that expensive. I'm also concerned about, you know, this is after it's brand new. This is what the maintenance costs are gonna be. What are the maintenance costs 10 years from now? As things, you know, even as we maintain, things are gonna start to deteriorate. So I'm worried about it escalating from here, that this is kind of the floor and then it goes up. So I wonder if our staff could speak to those estimates around the maintenance and the security and the rent for the field house, and even like the size of the field house. Like, it seems like that's a big space if it's gonna cost $280,000 to renovate and $100,000 a year to rent. It seems like a big space, bigger than I might expect. So I wonder if you just walk me through those. I realize that was a lot of questions all once.
Mr. Fleming and Yunchula?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to provide some overarching comments, and then I'm going to refer to Mr. McCray. You might recall that the maintenance costs associated with the space were something that council asked us to look at through the environmental assessment process. And that's where those numbers are coming from. That was reported to council in, I believe it was December of last year, 2016. But I think overarching, if we're looking at this space as a street, we're missing the point. So I don't think it should be compared to any other streets. This is a place, and that really is the way that the project has been labeled right from inception through the downtown master plan. And so it's understanding what are the maintenance costs of a civic space like this, which is to be I think the term is the most exciting place in the city, the place that we see as representing London from an image point of view, the place that is the primary meeting space for Londoners, and particularly within the context of a hardscaped space. So as opposed to a Victoria Park, for example, this is a hard surface. It's really critical that this space reads to Londoners as one that is not grubby, one that is not dirty, one that is exceptionally well maintained, so that feels like a welcoming space, a place that everybody belongs. And so we have seen some urban spaces that are deteriorated over time. Market Lane is one that's been identified as having issues with respect to the maintenance of the space, and it has an implication for how welcoming that space is and the perception that people have. So as I said, all of these numbers relative to the maintenance of this space, so that's a sustainable quality space, have come through the environmental assessment process, and I'll refer to Mr. McCray now to provide more information from that perspective.
The numbers in the business case for operating were derived from work that was undertaken with operations at the time of the completion of the EA and reported to Civic Works in the report. I believe it was in December of last year. And it looked at what the current costs were and what the increase in operating would be required to, as Mr. Fleming has described, to really bring the special place in, into a operating regime that it is worthy of. So it looked at more frequent levels of litter collection, picking up cigarette butts, item like that. Power washing of surfaces. I mean, currently that's done on on an as-needed basis, but quite infrequently. So that cleans the surfaces, gets rid of gum and whatnot on the surface. Graffiti removal, irrigation of the vegetation that's planned in the capital design of the place. Maintenance of street furniture. So we, part of the plan is, as Jim was describing earlier, in conjunction with the field house of having street furniture on the street, and that'll require maintenance. And it also, a big part of this is an improved snow clearing through the winter months. So that was a short description of the operational costs that were derived.
Anything further, Councillor? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so just about the field house, if I could just focus in on that. So we've got an estimate here for capital around $280,000, and then ongoing operations, which it says for like rent and utilities, of $100,000. So how big is this field house supposed to be?
So that budget was calculated with the assistance of our people in realty services, who suggested that 3,600 square feet with fitted out at $65 a square foot would, plus a contingency either way of 20%. That's how we got the 280. Making sure that knowing that we're in a short-term position, we might not spend it all, but we wouldn't want to be deficient in the first try if we couldn't even get a space for that. So they said, better to err with this kind of quantum than a 5% contingency or a smaller space that you can't fit, vertical umbrellas in, or something that you might need to store there. So that's how the math works. If you were asking me about how big the square footage, we hope we'll be able to find something close enough to Dundas Place to be able to do that. So that'll be another wild card that we can't foresee right now.
And I know that we dealt with a planning application that involved bonusing for a space within the building to support Dundas Place. Is the idea, if that were to work out and the building is built and the space is provided as part of the bonusing, that this is what it would be? Or is this in addition to the field house?
Right now, we're keeping our options open. We need to have a few irons in the fire so that we land on something. It really depends on the utility of the space. If they can offer space that isn't ordeal to take things in and out of and store on a daily basis, then it could be everything in one place. If it's stuff that's seasonal storage, but on a day-to-day basis, it might have to be divided up, and that 3,600 square feet might be in two places to do two different kinds of things. So it's just, we're hedging our bets by having a lot of options open, and if one falls through, then we have another one. So we could achieve a cost savings in a field house if 150 Dundas is available and built and ready to go when we're ready to have it, which would be a great thing because if I recall, that bonus on it was for a period of 10 years. So we're hoping.
Anything further? No further questions or comments? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. Just about the field house, Madam Chair, were we envisioning public washrooms in that?
That's an operational issue that we really haven't determined. So I don't know if it in the short term is something that we would plan on. For sure, a good field house over the course of Dundas Place over the long term would be ideal to have. I can't speak for what happens in Calgary or Regina or the others that we've looked here in, but I know from colleagues that I've spoken with, like the people who run Campus Martius in downtown Detroit, if they didn't have public washrooms as part of that facility, they told me that it would be far less likely that people would come with their families. Now they're supervised. You have to get into the washroom through a way that controls undesirable behaviors, but they're there. They're built into that system. We just don't know the answer in the short term to that, but a good field house would be able to provide for that service, perhaps not 24/7 and perhaps not come and go as you please, but to have them, we're aiming to have them. We just don't know if in the next 2 years, it's the kind of investment that we would make. That would be part of the metrics. Did you find a place to use a washroom? If not, then we would know that we should track to providing for that.
Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you. Just listening to the conversation, I have another question for you to staff about the stakeholders in the community. And I know Fanshawe College is going to be moving downtown, and if they are part of the stakeholders and the sort of part of the model that we're talking about.
Yeah, I forget how, it was said earlier in our conversation around this issue about the cooperation that we have in how London Convention Centre and Covent Garden Market and Bud Gardens works with downtown London. We've got this great network that happens in London with people talking to each other regularly. Fanshawe is part of that mix as well. Michelle over at Fanshawe is really the face of the Fanshawe campus downtown when it comes to operational stuff here. And the people who are in her network have been part and parcel of not only the planning of the capital project for Dundas Street, but helping us find solutions to the challenges of operations right now in Market Lane, and using that experience as a guide for how to roll it out when it comes time to open Dundas Place. So for example, practical considerations of security, routes between Carling to Dundas and through to Market Lane and Covent Garden Market in a north-south direction. These are two things that pop immediately to mind for me, and it's not just them. The museum has been cooperative in these discussions. The library, we've had initial discussions with the CBC radio people. So the idea that this is meant to be transformational on these blocks of Dundas Street into Dundas Place. People are talking a good game and they're being sincere about it, so we anticipate that we're starting off from a position of strength.
Great, thank you. And hopefully the last word, Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say, just because we were talking about some of the operating costs in greater detail, and I think it's good for us to scrutinize those numbers. But I want to say that there is a cost to doing something like this, to seeing a vision come to fruition. But there's a cost to not investing in this vision as well. And I'm glad that staff commented about Market Lane. And there was a vision there, but a vision with no operating budget and with no real plan. And we see where that can get us. And so we have to learn, I think, from that difficult mistake when we consider making the investment here. I also look at this as an investment that's going to have a huge return on that investment. We'll be able to have businesses thriving downtown. And we talked earlier today with the report about the geography of downtown, representing well less than 1% of our geography, but representing over 5% of our taxes collected. And so this is an investment that every Londoner is making by way of a contribution through taxes. It's done in partnership with some of our community partners as well. But it's an investment that's going to pay huge dividends as well for the, not just downtown, but for the entire community. So I'll leave my remarks there.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, ready to call the question. Oh, Councillor Helmut, the last.
Can you just call C2 separately?
C2 separately? Sure thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the bulk of the motion, less C2. Okay, and that's open. Okay, we'll call the question. This is everything but C2.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and we shall put C2 up. Did you want to speak to that, Turner?
Yeah, so I appreciate the answers from our staff. At this point, I'm not going to support this one. We're heading into the budget, and I just want to make one comparison, which was, I think it cost something like $300,000 to increase the sidewalk response to 5 centimeters from 8, which would have meant plowing the entire sidewalk network in the city 6 or 7 times more a year and making the sidewalk network that much better for everybody who's using it. We're talking about very significant amounts of money for maintenance of a 750-meter stretch of road. It's a great place, but it seems really high. There's other things we can do with that money. So, I'm open to talking about it. I'm certainly going to dig into it in more detail, but, we got to trade off against all kinds of important projects. I think the person on it for sure is a great idea. I think having the field house is good. The budget for security and maintenance, I have to be convinced that that's actually the right amount and that there's not some middle ground there that would be good and better than what we do everywhere else. But that seems too high. And so at this point, I'm not going to support it.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Councillor Helmer's comments. I think they're well suited for the budget discussion in the amendment, and at this point, I see us merely as moving that forward for the discussion in front of the whole council. So I'm going to support it at this time.
Thank you, and with that, we'll take a motion. And we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you, colleagues, and we'll circle back to item number 15, and I appreciate everyone's patience on this. It's a public participation meeting for an application by Romel Mostafa and Sarah Amin regarding a property at 491 Baseline Road East. We can take a motion to open the public participation meeting. Okay, moved and seconded. We'll call the question. Mayor and Councillor Hopkins? Councillor Hopkins? Great. Okay, Ms. Den.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a request for a demolition of a heritage-listed property at 491 Baseline Road East. The property is a 1.5-story vernacular cottage. Currently, it's a single detached dwelling converted into duplex use. Its heritage status is listed. Based on a review of historical maps, census data, and inspection of the basement by staff, it is likely that the cottage was constructed circa 1885, which is not the 1840 as noted in the inventory of heritage resources. The property is located south of Thames River, former Westminster Township on concession number 1, lot 26, west of High Street and on the south side of Baseline Road East. Wortley Village Old South Heritage Conservation District is located approximately 1.3 kilometers northwest of the subject property. There are few heritage significant properties identified in the area. Also included on the heritage inventory of resources are adjacent properties noted in red, circled there, at 495 and 503 Baseline Road East. Neither the Wortley Village Old South District nor the adjacent heritage resources exert a strong presence on the character of the area. Today, the area surrounding the subject property was developed in the late 1950s and 60s with modest post-war bungalows being the predominant style. A little bit about the historical background of the subject property. The area surrounding 49 Baseline Road East was part of Watson's 1810 survey for Westminster Township. Two sets of concessions, concession 1 and 2, were laid out from this baseline located south of Thames River. In 1819, a land patent was granted to John Shenick for 200 acres on concession 1, lot 26, which includes the subject property. The 1851 to 1852 census of Canada noted that John Shenick held 42 acres and a one-story log dwelling on concession 1 and lot 26. No structure is indicated on the subject property in 1862 Tremane's map. The 1878 map of the found in the Illustrated Historical Atlas indicates several structures at the corner of High Street and Baseline Road East. It is likely that one of these may be the subject property. A bit about the property itself. Front facade is symmetrically composed with a central doorway that is flanked by two identical windows. There's a front porch that was likely a later addition, which can be seen because of this kind of cutting into the top of the windows. The exterior of the cottage has been sheathed in vinyl siding over what was originally noted as stucco in the inventory. The existence of stucco could not be verified because only non-invasive methods were used during observation during the site visit by staff. The T-shaped plan with the front and rear portions, you can see here the front portion and the rear portions here, appear to be constructed at the same time based on the consistency of window style and detailing throughout. There's a small addition way at the rear here, constructed on a concrete slab on grade foundation, which appears to be a much more recent construction. Most of the windows appear to be original wood 2/2 sash windows with newer storms added. The peaked detailing of the exterior window lintels is discernible. However, the ear trim noted in the inventory of heritage resources has been obscured by either removed or because of the vinyl siding. There's a full basement underneath the front portion of the building and a crawl space underneath the T rear section. The outer basement walls are brick with interior supporting brick piers. Floor framing is constructed with milled wood joists and wood plank subflooring. One noted feature particular to this cottage, you can see here on the right, is this decorative wood paneled front door alcove and surround with arched header, side lights, and integrated transom. The request for demolition was received on October 13th. Staff visited the site October 16th. The latch was consulted at their November 8th meeting. We've received 3 inquiries seeking further information regarding the demolition request, primarily asking what's planned to be constructed in its place. Also, the property owner has sent their own letters or dropped off letters to surrounding neighbors, and we've recorded 4 replies from that supporting the demolition request. In terms of the evaluation, 906, the property does not meet design or physical value criteria. Neither does it meet the historical or associative value, or finally, the contextual value. The property did not meet the criteria for designation using the mandated criteria. The designation of the property under the Ontario Heritage Act is not recommended, and council should consent to the demolition of this property. So the following actions be taken: that the property be removed from the inventory of heritage resources, that the chief building official be advised that the municipal council consents to the request to demolition, and that the property owner be requested to salvage the decorative wood panel, front door, alcove, and surround. I should note that the Latch supported staff's recommendation at their meeting on the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dent. Before you go, are there any technical questions of staff at this time? Okay, seeing none, we can go to members of the public, but before that, we will go to the applicant if they would like to speak. Okay, welcome. If you could just state your name and address. Thank you.
Hold on. Good evening, Madam Chair, councilors. I'm Sarah, and this is my husband, Ramel. We are the current owners of the property. We would like to thank Latch and the city planner for reviewing our application, and we are definitely in agreement with their recommendation. We're planning to build a single-family detached home on the property in compliance with the city bylaw, and we've introduced ourselves to our family, to some of the neighbors, and as you've heard, some of them have supported our plans. I joined Ramel here in London 5 years ago when we got married. He's been teaching at Ivy for over 6 years now. We have a 2-year-old, and we would just love to see our family grow in London, and especially in the Old South. And at this point, if you guys have any questions for us, we're here to answer them, and thank you so much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant? Okay. Seeing none, we can go on to members of the public. You can have a seat. Any members of the public that would like to speak on this demolition request, you can come up to a microphone and introduce yourself. And one more time, are there any speakers on this item? Okay, seeing none, we can take a motion to close the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, looking for speakers, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'm glad the applicants had a chance to join us here today. And thank you, Dr. Dent, for your review of this property. I think it's well considered. Your review, as well as Latch's, showing a recommendation that council may proceed with a demolition permit and removal of the designation from the inventory. I think when you take a look at this property, I think the recommendations sound, especially the request to salvage the decorative wood paneled front door alcove and surround. I think that's probably the characteristic element of that. When we take a look at our site plan contexts, not necessarily the infill and intensification guidelines and the neighborhood character statements, one of the opportunities here is to actually create setbacks, front yard and side yard setbacks that help the rhythm of the street. If you take a look at this property, it's actually advanced forward a fair amount compared to its neighbors, especially with the addition of that porch, and it's really offset. The property sits, or the building itself sits almost right on the property line on the western side there. So I think this is a good opportunity. It sounds like it's very much in spirit or in conjunction with the spirit of the infill intensification and their neighborhood character statements. It's one for one. The intent doesn't sound in this place to be seeking severance or doubling on the lot. And they've exercised quite a bit of due diligence by going to their neighbors and seeking support. As the councillor for the ward, I have not received any concerns from either the neighborhood association or residents in the neighborhood. So I support the application as it stands.
Thank you, councillors. I've got Councillor Hopkins and Van Holst.
Thank you, and just to follow up with Councillor Turner's comments about the applicant reaching out to the community, I too want to thank the applicant for doing that. I think it's important to let the community know what the plans are and to be respectful of what exists already. So just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further speakers on this? Oh, pardon me, Councillor Van Holst, you were already on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our applicants. My brother-in-law owned a cottage also in Councillor Turner's ward, and I wanted to say, don't underestimate the value of the wood in the floor and in those joists. That can be reused. It's often very thick and very big planks, and they're wonderful pieces of lumber, very well dried.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, we can move the motion. Okay, and we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and moving along to item number 16, a public participation meeting for application by 2376563 Ontario Inc. for properties located at 447 Old Wonderland Road and 555 Teeple Terrace. Looking for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Okay, thank you, Councillor Cassidy and Hopkins. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Great, thanks very much. It's all yours. Okay, Mr. Conway, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Eric Conway. I work in development services. I'm landscape planner as file handler for the site plan control application at 447 Old Wonderland Road. The site is located at the northeast corner of Teeple Terrace and Wonderland Road South. It's generally rectangular. It tapers wider on the south side than it is on the north side. Immediately to the east are existing single-family residences. On the south side of Teeple Terrace is an existing commercial plaza. Immediately north is open space, and on the west side of Wonderland Road is multifamily residential. The property is zoned RO2 bracket 30, which is restricted office, including special provisions for a front yard depth of 0 meters and exterior yard depth of 0 meters, parking 85 spaces, and a height maximum of 9 meters. The zoning was approved as part of a board decision in 2015. We sent out a notice of application and public site plan meeting in the spring of this year. The first one was in May. And then we met with the applicant in the summer, in June, and they made a second submission in the fall, and we sent out a revised notice and a notice of the public meeting that we're here today. We had responses from a few residents. One of them was acting on behalf of the condominium corporation, but in general, the responses related to privacy, traffic, noise, and lighting, and erosion control, and the park to the north. One of the matters that the board member was not comfortable ruling on was whether a public site plan meeting should have been required or not. It was staff's recommendation that it was, and in June 2015, council asked the site plan approval authority to make the necessary arrangements to hold a public participation meeting before Planning and Environment Committee for the development of a medical dental office at 447 Old Wonderland Road. The proposed site plan is a building at the southwest corner of the site. It's 2 stories in height and about 1,500 square meters in gross floor area. They have 1 driveway off of Teeple Terrace that has 81 parking spaces and 16 bicycle parking spaces. There is a pedestrian entrance immediately on the west side, as well as one on the east side to the parking area and opposite to Wonderland Road with pedestrian access from either side. There's a bus stop on Teeple Terrace just east of where the driveway is illustrated, and there's also a bus stop on Wonderland Road South on the southeast corner of Teeple Terrace and Wonderland. The parking lot is landscaped generally in accordance with the control area bylaw. All those circles represent proposed trees. And the building has 4 sides. This is the east side. This is the west side, the north side, and the south side. External works required. We are requiring a turn lane be constructed on Teeple Terrace, which requires relocating the existing curb further to the south to allow a left turn lane from Wonderland Road on Teeple Terrace to allow for 2 cars to stack to enter into the driveway. And our recommendation in the report today is to host a public meeting and report back any issues that were raised.
Thank you very much. Any technical questions of staff at this time? Okay, seeing none, give the applicant an opportunity to speak. Oh, pardon me, Mr. Conway.
There's at least one error in my report. One kind community member who wasn't able to make it today, I spelled her name wrong and I told her that I would apologize and correct that. Gail Dobson, I believe is written. Her actual real name is Dim Sum. She was not impressed, but forgave me. So.
That's good that
Sorry.
you're forgiven. Alrighty. Would the applicant like to speak? Welcome, Ms. Dornbush.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of committee. We don't have much additional to add other than we've presented the site plan to staff as we brought this application through the Ontario Municipal Board in 2015. There's been some minor changes to the building design, but overall the development maintains the proposal that we presented to the public through the rezoning application in 2015. If there's any questions of committee or the public, we'd be happy to answer them for you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Turner and Helmer after.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Ms. Dornbush. You stated that this is materially the same as what was presented in 2015 when there was an opportunity to come back at a public site plan meeting. Were there any amendments or changes in reflection of the public concerns or desires?
Through you, Madam Chair. Essentially, we just implemented what was requested in terms of landscaping, fencing. There's a significant improvement to the exterior elevation of the building, but outside of that, there were no other matters that were required other than a geotechnical report, which we did undertake, and we did determine that there was no retaining wall required along the east property line. That was essentially why the board remained seized as part of this. Site plan process was because there was discussion on a retaining wall, but it is not necessary and it's not shown on the plan.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff, are you in concurrence with that assessment of the retaining wall?
Yes, we're in concurrence with that, through you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, my question is for our staff, and it's related to the trees that are being planted as part of the landscape plan. I zoomed in really closely on the drawing, and I think I can read what is there, but what's not clear to me, because I don't know that much about trees, is how large most of these trees are expected to grow, and what the canopy coverage on the site would be once they're kind of fully mature. As you know, we just dealt with urban tree planting strategy, and now I have a lot of questions about trees when we talk about site plans.
Through you, Madam Chair, trees are important, so I'm glad that we're talking about this. There's more than one type of tree proposed on the site plan. On the east side, there are conifers, varieties of pines that are kind of transparent rather than sisters like spruces or firs. In the parking islands, they're ornamental, so as far as urban forestry or urban shade cover in parking lots, they won't do great, but these islands are slightly undersized to the ideal size, and they're pretty hostile environments, but the trees that they're proposing there are pears, and they will do well, so there's a balance there. Along the road, they are large canopy shade trees, a variety of red maples, and honey locusts, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. On to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. I know the Wonderland Road EA is in the process, and speaking of trees, these trees, are they going to be sort of planted in an area where they may have to be removed as we widen Wonderland?
All of the trees proposed along Wonderland Road are on private property, and there's a 21 meter from center line road widening required as part of here that they are illustrating on the plan, or 22 meters, I'm sorry, which is very large for a road, so I hope not.
And if I just may, I've got another quick question, just reading through the report, the buffering. I noticed back in 2014, there was to be landscape buffering 6 meters, and now we're looking at changes. Just want to know why we've moved from, I guess we've come down from the buffering. Just trying to understand that a bit better.
Through the chair, as part of the board decision or the board discussion, there was this discussion about the 6 meter buffer, as well as the site plan control bylaw buffer of 1.5 meters. Ultimately, it was left up through the site plan process to resolve that. On the plan, there's a range anywhere from about 1.5 meters up to about 4.7 meters. And so we've worked with what's in the bylaw, but also what was utilized on the site through the development of the site. And we're sticking with what's in the site plan control bylaw, also using some of the buffering methods that were implemented through this process.
Any further technical questions? Seeing none, we'll go to members of the public. If you'd like to make comment on this application, please come to a microphone and introduce yourself. Don't be shy.
Thank you very much. My name is David Hall. I live at 439 Old Wonderland Road, and my property is right to the east of the subject lands that we're talking about. I also represent the Old Wonderland and Area Community Association, which is the neighboring community around this land. We've had some meetings concerning this proposal. This proposal has caused a lot of concern within our community right from the beginning when the woodland was suddenly destroyed over a Christmas weekend in 2013, almost 4 years ago, with no real explanation given as to why that was done. But it certainly resulted in a loss of privacy and concern from the whole area. It has scarred our community, our neighborhood, and we've been living with this for 4 years now, and we hope that some sort of resolution can be resolved or brought about. We want to thank the committee for allowing this public participation. I know that it's perhaps a unique situation to do this, but I think it reflects the concern of the whole community regarding what the future of this parcel of land is. There are some important decisions that have to be made, and I suppose for some people here tonight, the decision will be made, and that's the end of it. And for the rest of us up here, we live with those decisions every day from now on. So we are very, very concerned that the right decisions are made. We have several concerns that I'd like to raise with you. Some of them are perhaps minor, some of them are quite major. I don't know, Mr. Conway, do we have site plans available to look at that in reference?
I'll let Mr. Conway put that on the screen, but you're welcome to continue speaking, okay?
Okay. The photometric plan shows that one of the light standards, I believe, is in the wrong spot. It's right on the property line, and it should be, I think, on one of the islands, or down from it. It was indicated on the sheet that we got that it's right on the property line in the north east corner. That's the top left of that map. So that is an error that needs to be corrected. It cannot be on the property line. It needs to be further west. There it is.
So, sir, what we'll do is we'll go through your concerns and questions, and then when the rest of the public's done speaking, then we'll come back to and answer them all, okay? So if you want to keep going with
Just
your
keep
concerns,
going?
that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. We have a concern about the northern property line, which is on the left side of this plan. If we read the grading figures correctly, it appears that the property line will be maybe 1 meter above or higher than the sidewalk in the lower left corner. Anybody who drives by there realizes that there is a hill there that is at least 3 meters high, and the city property to the north of this, or to the left on this map, includes that hill. So something has to be done about the grading there. It's not just 1 meter high, it's way higher than that. And either a retaining wall has to be put in there or some serious grading. There are also trees in that area, and I want to point out that there is a very large tree in the corner, the northeast corner of the applicant's property. It's at least 80 feet high, and the trunk must be 5 feet in diameter. And that's not listed on the landscape design. We don't want to lose that tree. That is a beautiful tree, and we want it kept. It adds to the character of the community back there, and we want to make sure that that does not disappear. It has a large canopy, which indicates it has a large root system. And any work that's done in that particular corner, we don't want those roots disturbed, or the tree will die. If they put in a retaining wall along there, that's going to affect the roots. So I think the best solution is to have a much larger slope into the parking lot. There's also a tree on the city property, right in the middle of that line there. It's not as big, but it is very close to the property line, and that too will be affected. Something needs to be done there. We kind of wonder about the whole grading situation there. If you know the property on Wonderland Road, it's on a hill. The lowest elevation is the bottom left corner. The highest elevation is in the top right corner where the condominiums are. And there's a difference there of, I believe, 5 meters, about 15 or 16 feet. We're not sure that the grading that is indicated on the site plan is really correct. It seems to be that it's gentle, it's going to be gentle grading. We don't see how that can happen because of the slope of the land. So Wonderland Road is quite high on the right side, and it slopes down towards the left. My property is at the top of this on the east side, and it is considerably higher than the sidewalk along Wonderland Road. we just feel that some sort of closer examination of the grading needs to be done. The buffer zone, I'm glad that was raised because at the OMB hearing, the city pushed for a 6-meter buffer, and the OMB ruling was that this should be sorted out at this meeting. It appears to us that the city has caved on that. And what happened? Why are we not pushing for the 6-meter buffer like we did 2 years ago? I feel that just 1.5 meters of grass behind my house along my property line isn't quite enough, especially with snow removal, and that's something else I want to raise, is snow removal. They have indicated at the far left of the property, where I was suggesting that there should be a retaining wall, or more appropriately, a longer slope, that is snow storage. That is designated snow storage. And it seems to make sense. The snowplow would come in and just push everything back there. But that is going to not be good for the vegetation around there with salt and drainage, erosion, etc. And when it comes to parking spaces, I think that will be affected too. We all know these parking lots get full of snow with big mounds of snow that take up parking spots. And there's a question of the number of parking spots that are allowed for this size of building. Now, I've seen 2 different calculations offered by the applicant. The original plan indicated that there would be 1 parking spot for every 15 square meters of building, which meant they should have 97 parking spots, and they were going to go for 85. It sounds like the city has said, yes, let's go with 85, and that to me sounds like some sort of variance, and I don't know that there was an official decision made about that variance. I'm wondering, why have we gone to 85? The most recent site plan that we received, I believe, says 1 parking spot for every 40 square meters of building, which means that they should have 37 and they want 85. And I don't understand these figures. It sounds like they're playing around with numbers. But at any rate, if they go with 85, it sounds to me like it's 12 less than what they should have from what we originally saw, and with snow piling up there, it's going to reduce that number of parking spots as well. We are concerned about truck traffic coming in. We don't want to see trucks stopping along Teeple Terrace. It's too close to a very busy intersection. We think there should be no stopping signs along Teeple Terrace. Right now there's no parking, but we want to see no stopping, because as we've seen with other medical places around town on busy streets, these delivery trucks will put on their flashers, they'll stop in front of the medical building and run in their delivery, and they're backing up traffic. We want to see that the trucks come in and make their deliveries, but we don't see where their trucks would unload. We'd like to see exactly where trucks would go. And how do they turn around? Are they going to stop at the entrance in the laneway there and then back up? And we'd hear beep, beep, beep. That would be especially disturbing for the people in the condominiums, which are right beside that laneway. And I think it would be dangerous for trying to back out. So there needs to be some sort of turnaround in the parking lot for those trucks to go in, turn around, and go back out again. Garbage collection is a concern of ours as well. There's no indication really of how garbage will be collected. There will be, if this is a medical center, we assume that there will be biohazard materials to be picked up, and that needs to be looked after as well. The design of the building. We are not happy with the design. We don't think it adds anything to the character of our neighborhood. It doesn't blend in with our neighborhood. 99% of the houses around the neighborhood are brick. Orange, red, brown, brownish color brick. This is a dull gray. I think it's brick, but it looks like concrete to me. And it just doesn't add. It's not an interesting looking building. It looks like an elementary school built in 1962, and I think it could be made a lot more interesting. It's a boxy looking building. There's nothing interesting about it. Something needs to be done about the roof line to make it more appealing and blending in with the neighborhood. I would like to read something that the applicant provided. This is August of 2013. This is their urban design brief. And they wrote about the design of the building. The design objectives of the project include establishing a built form and site design, which, and they give several points here, one is functionally integrated into the larger community. Well, I just talked about that. It doesn't integrate into the larger community. Number two, it improves the quality of the existing pedestrian street environment. I submit to you that the woods were far better than this building, the woods that they took out. Number three, this building maintains the privacy of the adjacent residential land uses to the east. No, it does not. We are very concerned about the privacy. We finally got the applicant to put in a fence that was not indicated in the spring site plan. They're putting in a 1.8 meter fence. We don't think that's high enough, and I'm going to leave that for my colleague here from the condos to address. And finally, this building enhances an intersection serving as the main entrance to the Berkshire Village. And they, in another point, they call it a gateway, the gateway to Berkshire Village. I always thought the woods were a gateway to Berkshire Village, a lovely gateway, but now we've got a dirt pile for the past 4 years, and now we're going to get a concrete box. And I think we could do much better than that for making a gateway into Berkshire Village. That's all I have to say right now, unless there are questions of me.
I don't see any at this time, so thank you, Mr. Hull. We'll go on to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
As unaccustomed as I am, I'm not speaking, but we'll try this anyways, okay? My name's Dave Rutherford. I'm the president of Middlesex Standard Corporation.
Mr. Rutherford, if you could just tilt the microphone just a little bit higher, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm the president of Middlesex Standard Condominium Corporation number 502, which is located at 525 Teeple Terrace, which is the condominium. It's exactly east of the location that we're talking about. Now, there are several things that Dave went over and like that, and we're backing him 100%. These aren't just items that we sort of threw out, but privacy is the main concern, one of the main concerns that we have because of our proximity to the actual building itself. In other words, we are approximately 6 feet higher than what the building will be. Not what the building will be, but we're higher in elevation of 6 feet from where the elevation of the actual building is. And you've got a 2-story building there, so you do the math. I mean, let's say, I'm not sure the exact height of the building, but let's say it's 24 feet, all right? And you've got a situation whereby we're 6 feet higher than that, then all of a sudden we're going to be looking into a row of windows, okay, right across the back of those properties, okay, which presents a privacy issue, primarily because you're going to have people that are in there, doctors, even patients and like that, looking directly down into the backyards of the people that are at the condominium. Now, the other thing I must note as well too, that all the bedrooms and like that are on the back half of where the condominiums are as well too. So there's a bit of a problem here. And what I'd like to say is, okay, first of all, the first presentation that the applicant put in had us with a chain link fence across the back. Now he's putting a wooden fence in there, and the height of it is going to be approximately, I'll put it in feet because that's the thing I understand better. Okay, it's approximately 5 foot 5 inches high. I'm saying that you're going to need something that's going to be at least 8 feet high to get any type of security in the back end in the back end of these locations. Now, the other thing that I think is very important as well too, it should be a sound attenuation construction. And the prime reason I'm saying that is because you're going to be ending up having a lot of noise coming off the top of the buildings with regards to AC units, heating units, etc., which are a major concern, because think about it, if you were living that close to that operation, you'd be in a really bad situation from the standpoint of sitting there and listening to the noise levels. So the other thing we had proposed as well too is perhaps there has to be an attenuation sort of boxing around the equipment to stop the noise from coming up and over top of the fence. Now, the situation with regards to people glaring from the second floor down into the property, I think we got a solution for that, and it's very simply what we'd like to do is ask that the applicant, all right, install frosted windows, which would be placed right across the back. That would give him the light. It would give us the privacy that we require, okay? And I think it's something that we should consider. The other thing that is, besides noise that we were talking about and that attenuating fence, which would be absolutely a must as far as I'm concerned, lighting would be the second area that we got to take a look at. And what I'm proposing is, very simply, is that at night, when the place is not functioning, the lights should be dimmed down in some manner. In other words, whether it's timers that cut off a series of the lights, whatever the case may be. Because otherwise, you got to remember I told you the bedrooms are across the back end of these condos, and I'm suggesting that this is going to create a problem with regards to light levels that will be there. And it'd probably be a smart move if we turn around and we get deflectors that will actually deflect the light back into the areas that are required. If we had a timing system that would reduce the amount of light that's being generated during the night hours and like that, and give these people some poor sleep, or give them an opportunity of sleep, I think that'd be well within the considerations of the group. And another area of concern, excuse me, is signage. Now, one of the things that we're really concerned about is very simply that lit signs, if they were placed on the back end of the building to attract people coming down Teeple Terrace, okay, or when I say the back end, I'm saying facing the condominium group, okay, that would be detrimental as heck as far as we're concerned. It'd be another part of the lighting pollution is what I like to call it. So what we submit is very simply is that any signage on the back or even on the south side of the building, which could reflect a certain amount of light, should be not allowed. And perhaps if he wants to, he can put all the signage he wants facing towards Wonderland. I've got no problems with that. And I'm talking about lit signage, okay, versus, let's say, straight signage that has no lighting on it whatsoever, all right? So that's one of our other concerns, to try to limit the amount of light that is being generated. So I think that, you know, there's probably a number of other issues that we can probably get into. I mean, everything from Dave was talking about garbage. Now, I think the bylaw, if I'm corrected, or not the bylaw, I mean, the provision that is allowed is that they were going to turn around and allow for city pickup. And I believe that's 12 bags per pickup, all right? What's stopping the said applicant from turning around and ending up, let's say, a year after the application goes through, and he finally builds this place and everything else like this, what is stopping him from turning around and putting in garbage bins? Well, two things that I really get concerned about with those garbage bins. Number one, they would be taking up additional parking, which they're underachieving already, okay? The second thing would be with regards to the smells and odors that would persist, okay? Because our residents are facing back on them. I thank you very much for your time, and that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Are there further speakers on this issue? If so, come on to a microphone and introduce yourself. Okay. Okay, one more time. If there's any other speakers on this, come down to a microphone and introduce yourself, please. Alrighty, seeing none, we can take a motion to close the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And just before we get into making a speakers list, I'll give staff an opportunity to address any of the concerns that have been raised.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. And I've had the opportunity to speak with both community members who had presented there. I think first, there's a whole series of considerations that were raised there, and I think the first one to address is parking. One of the special provisions that was decided on with the board hearing, or the board decision, was a modified parking rate. Parking is relative to use. Depending on the use in town, it has a variable parking rate. For medical office, it's 1 per 15 square meters. For a professional office, it's 1 per 40 square meters. Both are permitted on this restricted office zone. The modified parking rate that was approved reads, in accordance with section 41910, which is the part of the bylaw that lists off individual parking rates based on use, or 85 spaces, whichever is less. So absolutely, if there is a medical office at 1,500 square meters here as proposed on the drawings before you and submitted with their application, then they need 100 parking spaces, but this would automatically round down to 85. And absolutely, there is only 81 shown on the current plan. So parking is still an outstanding matter in some degree, but that's to provide a little bit of clarity for the number of 100 that you heard and the number of 81 that you heard before. With respect to lighting, the community member was right. The plans that were circulated don't match. There's a site plan that was submitted as well as a photometric plan. Am I allowed to use screen reader? Okay, good. And part of our jobs is to make sure that the plans that we are endorsing for approval do match. As part of the application, they had to give us a photometric plan, and to illustrate the discrepancy, these values on the ground are numbers, illumination values, and the light that was referred to is this one here, and this is the eastern property line. Relative to the latest site plan, you can show that the light is in a far more palatable location. LS light standard is shown over here, so I might refer you to Appendix B of the report, which lists off a series of site plan matters to still be addressed, but lighting is absolutely one of them, and staff are supportive of the light standard that's closer to Wonderland rather than 3 yards away from the abutting properties. Large trees in the northeast corner, I think I said before, trees are important, and in site plan control, we're compelled to try and find a way to save as many large trees when given the opportunity. They submitted a tree protection report that was dated March 2016. We're still asking for a current one, but even in the March 2016 report, no large trees were surveyed on site, and it is news to me if there is one in the northeast corner there. So we'll get that current report done by an arborist, a forester, or an LA, probably an LA in this case because they already have one retained. And if there is a large tree there, we'll endeavor to find a way to save it. But as far as I know, and according to their most recent information, there is no large tree. Buffer and snow storage with respect to the open space lands immediately to the north. Staff are also not supportive of storing snow on the high side. It drains down into the open space lands, and we are mindful that salt can damage woodlands or wooded areas. We're supportive of using the depressions proposed along Wonderland Road, not on Wonderland Road, as part of their snow storage, and that's one of the outstanding revisions. Regarding the parking lot elevation, they are considerably modifying the existing grade on site, and if you can picture a storm event landing on the parking area, everything will go south and then to the west. Nothing that lands in the parking area is supposed to go north the way that they've engineered the site. It all generally tips to the west towards Wonderland, and even the overland flow route, the areas where a lot of water will spill over the curb, go into depressions along Wonderland and then into the storm system. What will go north is water that lands north of the parking area, and they will create a slope that'll be seeded down to the existing elevation of the wooded area. That goes back to the current tree protection report that they're referring to, and their sample size needs to include all trees within 3 meters, or depending on where you're proposing to alter, if they're proposing to alter on city property, we'll need a little larger of a report. But absolutely putting up a retaining wall on the north side is not warranted with the way that they're proposing to grade this site. For no stopping versus no parking on Teeple Terrace, I'll defer to my peers in transportation. With respect to the design of the building, they are proposing brick, that's shown on the elevations. And regarding compliance with their urban design brief, I'll leave that to other staff members to reply to. I heard before that they weren't providing or proposing a privacy fence on the original plans. That is true. With the plans that were submitted in May and circulated to the community, there was just an existing property line shown there. And I'm happy to say that the latest plans submitted do show a 6-foot wood, assuming it's wood, it just says 6-foot high privacy fence, and our control area bylaw would specify wood, tight board. We're worried about glare and the nuisance of headlights. Whether it should be a sound attenuation fence or a wood fence, our control area bylaw is somewhat silent on that. We have policies that require noise reports to be done for residential developments along arterial roads. If this was a residential development, we would absolutely require a noise report to determine where and what extent a sound fence would be required. In this case, we still have a noise study that we have asked them to do for rooftop mechanical. The elevations described relative to the existing residences to the east are correct. I've seen it myself. The townhouses are about 6 feet higher than the existing property lines. A 2-story building on the west of that with 2 rows of parking in between and a drive aisle means that it's quite plausible and likely that the second story of the medical office is a clear line of sight to the existing elevation of the residences to the east, and a 6-foot fence being lower than the elevation of the townhouses may not provide the visual privacy for the second story. One of the outstanding comments in the Appendix B is to provide privacy film for the second story windows on the north and east side. Similar but different with the signage they are proposing. I think it was Aerotech on the east side of the building, which seems, well, it would advertise to the east rather than to on the west or the south side. And garbage, the control area bylaw allows us to regulate how to manage waste on site. And in this case here, I don't remember exactly what the note was, what the community member upstairs in the gallery did, which is great. Waste is internal according to this, and then they would have to put it at the curb, and our trucks come by. There is limits as to how often and how much can be stored. And they're absolutely right that medical office garbage has to be treated differently, and I don't know the limits on that, but I think the applicant could probably clarify a few of those things for us as well.
If there's any, excuse me, if there's any clarity regarding the urban design matters, I know our colleague in urban design is here to discuss that if needed by the committee.
Looking to committee, would you like that clarification from urban design? Yes, please.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I just took a couple notes from the gentleman who was speaking. The urban design brief mentioned improved pedestrian streetscape, maintaining privacy and enhancing the intersection as a gateway. Some of the ways that this proposal is doing that, we have a two-story mass of the building located at the corner, which does relate to the street in a positive manner. We have some pedestrian connections that are going out to Wonderland, and the parking is set back from the building, so it doesn't become the dominant feature along that streetscape. There's a significant amount of glazing along all street frontages. The building is located further away from the residential area, but if it's something that we want to go back and look at providing something like frosted glass or something on that second story to help with privacy, I think that would be manageable. Yeah, and I think the materiality of the building, it's of high quality. We have brick and a lot of glazing and canopies where necessary.
All right, looking to committee for speakers. Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Elmahut, if you could speak to traffic.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. I guess this is about the parking on the street, like is there a... Okay.
Yes, for the trucks and those sorts of things.
So the bylaw for parking, for on-street parking, prohibits anyone stopping or parking within 30 meters of a signalized intersection, as well as within 20 meters from approaching a street. So if we look at between Wonderland and the other side street, so the bylaw, without even having a sign there, within 30 meters from Wonderland, nobody is allowed to park, or 20 meters from the other parallel side, local street. That said, we can look into having a sign in the middle with no parking, no stopping, and I will put that as a note to check with Mr. McGuire about that.
Thank you very much. Looking for speakers, committee. Councillor Cassidy, then Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted, through you, to ask staff for a little bit more clarification on a couple of the things that the community members raised. So the garbage, could they decide at some point in the future to put bins in? Is this just an agreement that we have or a decision that they've made, but bins are allowed on this site?
Through the chair, the installation of bins would not necessarily go with what the approved plans show. So at that point, it becomes a compliance issue, which would be subject to our compliance folks in development services.
Thank you. So somebody could complain if they decided to install bins, and then we have the loud banging that sometimes happens.
That's correct, through you, Madam Chair.
And about the parking lot at night, if it's lit, is there a requirement that they dim those lights so that they be on a timer or something like that?
Through the chair, the photometric plan did speak to the lights being manually shut off between 12 and 6, if I recall correctly. It's not unprecedented for these types of clauses as well to be worked into the development agreement.
Thank you. And one final thing about the sign that would be facing east. Could it be a lit sign or would it just be a regular sign? I wasn't clear about that.
Through the chair, it could be a regular sign. We were looking through the comments to avoid a lit sign through the submission in the comments.
Through the chair, if I may, the signs, even if it was to be illuminated, in our new sign bylaw, we have restrictions that the sign cannot be lit between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. if it's located within 30 meters of a residential zone. On the other hand, it could not be lit between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. unless the business was operating during those hours. And even if it was lit, we even have requirements in there with respect to the intensity of illumination so it doesn't adversely affect residential zones.
Through you, Madam Chair, thanks to staff for those answers, and I also just want to thank the community for coming out with suggestions and solutions as well. So it's been very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to community members for your submissions. I think they're very well considered. I think it's obvious we spent a lot of time going through the plan itself and taking making a series of recommendations for mitigation. This has been a challenging proposal, and I think what I might want to start with, certainly I've got a number of questions, but the first one is this list of outstanding site plan control matters on page 10 here, that list everything from providing noise study for rooftop mechanical, tree preservation report, reallocating snow storage, proposed parking. So as of November 7th, those comments were provided to the applicant. Have we had response? And I'm curious what the applicant's position on these are. These all seem like very reasonable and things that I think should absolutely be considered as part of site plan approval. So I guess I would look either through the chair to you or to the applicant for comment on that. I guess Ms. Dornbush.
Yeah, Ms. Dornbush, take the.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. So we have had an opportunity to go over the comments. We are working on the revised drawings and are trying to get them back in as quickly as possible, and we anticipate hopefully by the end of next week. In terms of the comments, I was just speaking to the staff members. We have no issues with the conditions that have been presented. The only concern that we do have, and I would like to raise this to the committee, is the request for some sort of treatment on the windows or some sort of frosted glass. As you heard from the neighbors, this property is 6 feet lower than the adjacent property, and it's a 2-story building. This property was, when we started with this is a medium density residential designated property. It's always been contemplated by the official plan that these lands were to develop. Originally, and based on those policies, you would find that that could even be a 4-story apartment building. Instead, we have a 2-story commercial building that's 6 feet lower than the property next door to it. So essentially, the second story of this commercial building is almost going to be at an equal height than the 1-story condo units next door. And from our perspective, it doesn't seem appropriate to start screening 1-story, essentially 1-story building next to another 1-story building with an 8-foot privacy fence between the two. I think that raises concerns with compatibility that have not existed in other locations. And I don't think that that's the condition we need to start looking at when we're dealing with these sorts of applications. I think there's other measures, and not only while we understand that there's privacy concerns with the neighbors, this is also, some of the units within this building are also proposed to be medical dental. So there's privacy issues on the interior of this building in the same manner. But I believe that the best way to handle that is through internal measures. And again, we're dealing with a 2-story building that's 6 feet lower next to a 1-story building. And this is a new circumstance that we're experiencing now, that we're looking at glazing and putting restrictions on windows when we've never experienced that before. So that is a concern for us. And we would suggest that there be no additional measures be added to the easterly windows on this building. Outside of that, we are addressing all of the concerns, and we'll provide that information in the next resubmission.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Dornbush. Hearing from the two Davids, did you guys get together on that? There's a series of things such as retaining wall in the north that was discussed, retention of the large tree. We're going to look into how that maps against the site plan and make sure that that's addressed as well. Snow removal, I think, is an absolute valid point. If there was, Mr. Conway talked about having snow plowed over towards an open space area, and then all the salt that's associated with parking lot maintenance melting down into that. So I had concerns about that as well. I think those are quite valid, and knowing that that is a condition of that snow removal area being removed from the site plan would help to satisfy that. The garbage bin question, I think that was addressed, lighting, window frosting, sound attenuation. So is there an opportunity in the sound study to do sound attenuation on the mechanical itself rather than addressing it through a sound attenuation fence at the property line?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. That's usually what happens when we're buffering rooftop mechanical. It's far more efficient and usually effective to put a low wall around any rooftop mechanical close to the source, and absolutely that's probably what the conclusion will come up with.
Thank you very much. So the one that I'm curious about that we haven't really discussed was the difference between the two heights of fence. The 1.8 meter versus the suggested 2.44, so 6 versus 8. Any thoughts from staff on the impacts of that, whether an 8-foot fence could be accommodated or ill-advised?
Through the chair, the maximum through the fence bylaw, which is outside the site plan control bylaw, is about 7 feet, about 2.2. I can't do the math on the fly. The site plan control bylaw speaks to something different about 1.8 meters, so I'm now bouncing back between imperial and metric, sorry for that, which is slightly shorter. The fence bylaw does say that if there's an agreement under section 41, which is site plan control, that it would defer to that and not necessarily through the fence bylaw. And the fence bylaw, through site plan control, we could take cues through grade change, for instance, and maybe look at something beyond the 1.8 meters. So it's not as rigid as maybe other bylaws. There's some ability in there for some flexibility and some interpretation based on site circumstances.
Thank you. So I think in hearing from staff and from the community and from the applicant as well, that I think there's a series of recommendations in here that make a lot of sense, such as exploring opportunities for a taller fence along that property line, along the eastern property line, the sound attenuation for the HVAC, the second-story window frosting. I think we heard some discussion on both sides, and Ms. O'Hagan talked about the opportunity that could be something that could be considered as part of the urban design piece of it. I think this starts to be reasonable. Ms. Dornbush, your points are considered. I think there's a fairly challenged relationship between this property and the neighborhoods. And I think in this circumstance, it's appropriate to try and take a look at remediative action that can help to mitigate the impacts on the neighborhood. No stopping along Teeple Terrace for that section. Thank you, Mr. Almahood, for looking at that. I think the bylaw itself is helpful. Explicit signage would be even more helpful, and having no stopping in there, so that you're right that loading unloading happens on the property and not on the street itself. The light timing clause, it's good to hear that there's the capability of being able to do that, and having no lit sign is, especially on the eastern facade of that building, I think is a good address to the concerns that have been heard from the neighborhood. So, I mean, ultimately, the fact that 81 spots are demonstrated on the site plan and 85 are required is concerning. That we have a submitted site plan that's not reflective of the requirements in these circumstances, and for us to consider as a committee a site plan that's not reflective of what the even the intermediary end stage is. So I think if I were to make a motion of things that should be considered as part of, for consideration by site plan approval, those items plus any of the outstanding items that exist in those that were raised by staff in the report would really help to address the community concerns and my concerns as a representative for the ward.
Thank you, Councillor. So you've moved the motion. We'll just get it up. Are there any further speakers on this? Councillor Helmer?
Okay, so I want to talk about the trees again. So especially this part that is sort of the buffer between the parking lot and the condominium corporation that's to the east. It looks like there's 3 large trees. I think you said they're red maple along that perimeter, and it looks like one every 12 meters, something like that. And I'm wondering if, considering the concerns around privacy and so forth, are the trees appropriate and is the spacing appropriate? Would adding some trees in there help, especially in the medium and longer term, in terms of creating that kind of separation between the uses that people are looking for? I'm not really a fan of very tall fences. I think they're a really bad way of keeping things separate, whereas trees are a very, very good way of doing that. And so I wonder if our staff could just speak to the spacing of the trees along that perimeter.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is room for more trees is probably not the right words, but right now they are doing 1 per 12 meters for the canopy trees, and there's also 3 coniferous trees, the circles with SPs on them. Those are variety of pine that I'm not overly familiar with, and I forget the cultivar, but one of our recommendations was change those to spruces or firs that have a more dense canopy. And as they grow up, they will be a far better buffer than an 8-foot fence or 6-foot fence ever would be. The problem with that is time and how big of plant materials you can get. Our control area bylaw recommends 6-foot trees for conifers and then caliper sized trees for canopy. I would say, yes, there could be a denser buffer here, but whether it's right when it's built, it would be equal, but over time, the more plant materials and denser would be a better buffer. And there is room for it here. Luckily, there's a 4.5 meter buffer, whereas our normal circumstances are 1.5 meters. So there's even room for trees to grow and thrive.
Thank you. And again, I'm zoomed in to read your very small print table. And under size and condition, it looks like all these trees are coming in at 60 millimeters. And would another option be to plant larger trees, like essentially to plant bigger ones to begin with?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's how wide the trunk is at 5 feet tall or so, and depending on the species, larger caliper may mean a taller tree, and depending on the species, 60 millimeter caliper could be a 12-foot tree already, but it's a balance of, I did say before, this is a great area to grow trees with the red maples. In general, yeah, the larger the caliper, the larger it would be, and I would advocate for conifers or pyramidal trees that grow upright and dense rather than larger caliper that are more expensive, harder to source, and not long-term. Planting larger is not ideal. They don't adapt as well, and it's a cross slope that they're planting on. So 60 millimeter caliper trees is pretty standard, and you could recommend to go bigger, but it may not solve the problem long-term as much as more trees, same size.
Thank you. So I'll let my colleagues think that over, whether in the direction to the site plan approval authority, we want them to consider additional trees either in that section or generally across the perimeter. I think that it's helpful, and I'm glad that we have expert staff who can handle all of the details. Frankly, like I'm glad I asked the question, but I think I'll leave it to you folks about how that could be done. I do think that the idea of using a natural buffer rather than a fence is probably better in the short term and in the long run. I do want to say, there's some commentary from members of the public, and I appreciate them coming here tonight about, cutting down of the trees in the property, and certainly, especially with the tree protection bylaw we brought in, we're trying to prevent, earlier cutting of trees in preparation for development, and I recognize that can be a problem, and even now that we've brought in the tree protection bylaw, sometimes it still is a problem. But I also think we have to recognize that we all live somewhere, and generally speaking, wherever we lived, it used to be a tree. A lot of the housing that has been built is a result of cutting down trees and building housing on top of it, including the condominium corporation that's right beside the site. There were trees there before it was built. And the condominium corporation that's further east at 499 Teeple Terrace, again, it was a lot of trees, and we cut them down and put houses there. So we do try and protect them. It is an issue, obviously, trading off between development and the natural systems. But it happens everywhere, and I think of the site plan, we really got to focus on what are we going to preserve, how are we going to plant new ones so that what is there is going to be effective, and perform those ecological functions, even though we've put in parking lots and buildings and taken away a lot of the green space. For what it's worth, looking at the overheads and the lot lines, which are kind of irregular, I think that the big tree that people are talking about is on the property line for 433 Old Wonderland Road. I don't know if that's the case for sure, but it looks like it's right at the back of that property line and not on the subject property. I guess to be determined, but it does look like that to me from the overheads.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers? Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, thank you, and I want to thank staff for the work and the applicant, and hopefully we can continue doing work together to come up with an application that the community is appreciative. I know it has scarred the community, and it is really difficult. I appreciate Councillor Helmer's comments about, for sure, we've all probably lived in a place where trees have been at one time. But what I see, and it's very frustrating as a councillor, when we do have development and that we have situations where tree clearing goes on, and I'm really not sure how we are discouraging that kind of behavior. I have concerns because, like Councillor Helmer said, it happens. It goes on. I know we've got a tree preservation bylaw, trying to strengthen that. I just get very, very frustrated when I hear over and over again. And it is the scarring that happens in the community. And I really hope that, I appreciate the work that staff is doing, and I hope the applicant and staff work together to make sure that they satisfy the community. The community lives there. They understand their community, and we need to do a better job to discourage what goes on. It happens over and over again, and I'm just very frustrated sometimes. And sitting here, I don't even know what to say to the community. Because it is scarring. You can't turn back, and yes, we can all move forward, but I would hope that we developments occur and we discourage this kind of behavior, and I really hope that the concerns that the community expressed this evening, the applicant will hear that and will rectify and do whatever they can to make this development happen. I would like to know a little bit more about the fencing. I think that's very important. Is it going to be a chain link fence, or is it going to be a wooden fence? Obviously, the height going too high is a concern, but I think those things need to be addressed. As we heard tonight, it's a privacy issue now, and if more trees can be put in to create that effect, I would encourage the applicant to do that. So I don't know. It's just one of these situations where I think we have to just try to move it around and kind of see if we can do the best that we can with this application moving forward. And I think this committee is very sensitive to the community's concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quickly, I think it's up there, it's on my screen here, but the motion that's been crafted there, does that tend to capture the discussion, and is it instructive enough for the site plan control to be able to action on the desires expressed by the community and the committee? And the second would be to look for a way to incorporate wording to the extent of enhancing the canopy cover along the eastern fencing. So I guess the first part is a question through you to staff, and the second is through you to Ms. Lisinski, if we could add some wording to reflect the desire of the committee to. Sorry, because we're done. Thanks.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I would listen to the video and enhance what is there now based on what the public has said tonight.
Through the chair, I think we'd support something like that. I think we're looking probably for a bit more detail, something a bit more explicit, but if that's going to be conveyed through by council or in time for council, we'd be supportive of that.
Yeah, that will certainly be conveyed before council. Councillor Turner, do you want to finish?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I do thank the committee. I thank staff. I thank the applicant for working to find resolution on what's been a long story. The genesis of a lot of policy has come out of this application and the history of this application. If you take a look at our site plan control rules, and if you take a look at the tree preservation bylaws that we've passed, all of them come out of the history that happened on this site. Now, unfortunately, became sacrificial for that to be accomplished. But I think that policies, those policies, as they've developed, have gone a long way in helping to inform the way our city develops. That's been incredibly informative and helpful. And again, unfortunately, regrettably, something like this had to happen first. Ultimately, what that would have meant is that the change in the way this process would have happened would have been there would have been some tree preservation components and some site plan discussions prior to the removal of trees. There would have been trees removed, as Councillor Halmer noted. There would have been a lot more discussion, and it would have been in a much more coordinated fashion with community and with staff to be able to accomplish what it looks like is being moved towards right now. I think I thank you to my colleagues for their comments as well. I think it's helpful, and I look forward to these measures being accomplished within the site plan. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further speakers, we can open this up to be moved. And we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, great. And for individuals in the public, we'll be dealing with this at our next council meeting on Tuesday. All right. And on to our next agenda item, number 18, the tree protection bylaw. So colleagues, we don't have a presentation on number 18, but are there any questions of staff at this point? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a chance to talk with Mr. Fleming a little earlier, but I might just give him a little bit of opportunity to look for some questions. We had some funding that kind of went unspent on tree management for the first couple of years of this term, and I wondered if there might be some opportunity to leverage some of that in the interim to support some of this activity. In the report, it's very helpful. It starts to paint us a little bit of a picture of the impact of the changes we made, and I mean ultimately it ends up in a almost five-fold increase in the number of trees that would be protected as a result of the bylaw. But obviously that has a significant impact on the workload. And I think that's helpful for us to understand what the impacts of policy decisions are at this table. But I think it would be helpful also to understand if there are ways that we can help mitigate some of the cost impacts without necessarily touching the diameter.
So, Madam Chair, first I want to say that I'm feeling very alone tonight. Unfortunately, Ms. Spence, she... Oh, there we go. Well, that was nice, but it was short. Ms. Spence, unfortunately, has had a little bit of an automobile accent, she's fine, but at the reporting center. So, and Mr. McPherson's not here, so I'm going to do my best to pinch hit here. I will say that, as Councillor Turner pointed out, when the tree protection bylaw came forward to deal with exactly the issue that was raised through the application you just dealt with, what we had recommended was that trees be covered if they're in a tree protection area. It doesn't matter what the size of those trees are, they would be covered. But also distinctive trees would be covered if they are 75 centimeters at breast height or larger. And the direction that council went, understandably, was we'd like to cover distinctive trees which are 50 centimeters in diameter or larger. And as a result, and you can see the stats in the added page, which is a little bit different. The stats are the same, but there's a little bit of a correction. It's actually 4 times the number of trees that we would have had to deal with in terms of permit applications if we were dealing with a tree that was the 75 centimeters versus the 50 centimeters in size. And the result of this has been, it's not just the applications. You can see that there's a lot of work that's come with it. We did say that we would come back as council directed after a year, and it was August that this was approved, so this is a little bit more than a year later. But in terms of the financial implications of this, first I'd say that there's implications in terms of our existing resources and our ability to implement the urban forest strategy. So we've made it very clear here that there will be elements that are delayed in the urban forest strategy because of the administration of the bylaw as it's been crafted. And this relates to everything from the tree planting bylaw to other parts of the urban forest strategy, like the education in the community and some of those pieces. And so we've included in the report a bit of a reprioritization of the work program under the status quo. There are 3 options that we've identified going forward. The option that we're suggesting, just given the current budget situation, is to keep going forward, recognizing that there would be a delay in some of those elements relating to the urban forest strategy. A second option would be to go back to the 75 centimeters versus the 50 centimeters. And the third would be with respect to adding 2 staff resources. So to Councillor Turner's question, there is no funding that's available that could accommodate that. That would be something that if council directed, we'd have to find a source of funding for, and there's nothing that's identified in the budget for that. So if council wanted to go in that direction, it should be directed to the 2018 budget process, municipal budget process. But what we're recommending at this time is moving forward, we wanted to explain what the impact is and administer the program or the bylaw as we've indicated and enforce it as we've indicated, and move forward a little bit more slowly on the urban forest strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Any further questions on this? Comments? Okay, seeing, Councillor Hopkins, then Van Holst.
Just a quick question through you, Madam Chair, to staff about the money that we've received for these permits. Do we know where we stand and how much we've received?
Well, there's a couple aspects to that. First of all, the fee, the permit fee is very low, and that was something that we recommended, and council confirmed when we came forward that the fee should be low, or we're going to send tree cutting underground. So in order to encourage, particularly since it's new, encourage people to go through the proper process, apply for a permit, the fee should be low, and it certainly doesn't come close to recovering. It's $100, I think, per tree, and then there's an equation in there as you get into multiple trees. So nothing by comparison to the cost of providing the service or the resources that are required to get back to where we were prior to August when we started to implement this program.
And another question I have too is I understand the first year has been sort of an education process educating especially the contractors out there that do tree removal and the public. Do you see that slowing down as we move forward, or where are we with educating the public?
Well, Madam Chair, I think there's a large job still to be done in educating the public. We have focused on the service providers, so this is the industry, and most members of the public go to the industry. I would note that that there were 400 applications, so obviously people are applying, and that's very positive. There are also, if I can find it here, 1,325 inquiries relating to the tree protection bylaw, and there are also, let me see if I can find it here. There were enforcement calls that I think were in around the 400 mark too. There it is, estimated enforcement calls, roughly 400. So that says to me that the public is understanding that there's a bylaw out there, and that's positive. I think some of the pieces of the education program that are missing relate to some of those elements around the value of the tree, and it also ties into those education programs around the planting program. And you might recall from the planting program that we brought to the last cycle of planning committee, said when you plant a tree in year 1, you have a canopy of about 1 square meter. And then in year 20, it's 26 square meters. And in year 50, it's 176 square meters. So if you're cutting down a 50-year-old tree, that's 176 times the size of one planted tree when you plant it. And it just underscores how important the protection of trees is, and the relative impact that it has on the canopy targets the council has in place. That's something that I think the education process around the linkage between removal, how people deal with their trees, as well as planting opportunities, that connection, there's a big job still left to do.
You all set? Councillor Hopkins? Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I want to make a couple comments about the appeal process. I attended one of those. One of my residents was hoping to cut down a tree, and it seemed like that was extremely costful of resources. There's probably 6 staff members there for an entire day for 2 applications. You know, one of our legal staff, the manager of parks, was there, one of our clerks, and then we, I guess we hired someone to officiate that, and I think what was needed was an enumeration of some compelling reasons. So one of the ways to have a tree cut down, there was a couple things that would allow a tree cut down, and then it said also some compelling reasons. And in this, the applicant actually gave probably half a dozen what I would have considered compelling reasons, but they weren't recognized in the discussion by the whoever's the officiant there. You know, in this example, it was a tree that was probably planted by a squirrel. That was Mr. McPherson's guess. It was right on the property line, so it was interfering with them to be able to put a fence. Not a particularly attractive tree. But the applicant wanted to do some urban farming. She was doing some pretty intensive urban farming, wanted to put up some fruit trees instead, and of course the shade was going to interfere with those. And what we also didn't have was any way to make up for a tree. Well, the argument was, well, if you cut down a tree and you plant another one, as just said, then there's no, a big tree isn't as good as a small tree. But somebody who wanted to plant more trees, she had hoped to plant quite a number of fruit trees, which would have expanded and had you know, quite a number of trees would get an area that was similar. But we didn't seem to have any way to deal with that. So it did seem like we were spending a lot of resources in that particular appeal process. And And I think it seemed very frustrating for the applicants as well. So those are my comments about that. I wasn't really happy with how that went for them.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, if you can allow me one more question. Just I noticed while I was reading the report that you mentioned that there are some major challenges, and given what we've just heard tonight, I guess, how can we become less reactive? That was one of the major challenges I noticed in the report with this bylaw. And, you know, it's something that makes me wonder. It's usually too late sometimes in situations when trees do come down. How can we sort of not react to usually it's too late scenario? Is there something that, you know, staff has looked at or considered that we could be doing a better job at?
Well, Madam Chair, certainly the application that you just dealt with, if that was in a tree protection area, which it likely would have been, the bylaw was not around at the time, then it would have been protected. And that would mean that there would have been the potential for some significant fines if trees were removed prior to the approval being given. And that could come through a site plan approval process or through a tree removal permit. That said, there have been some cases where people have been a little bit frustrated recently that the bylaw hasn't done what they would hope it would do. In a lot of cases, that's because a cluster of trees were not identified in the tree protection area, and there's usually a good reason for that. And that might mean that it's outside a tree protection area, maybe there was 4 or 5 or 6 that were distinctive trees, but the larger grouping of trees was not protected through the tree protection bylaw. But I will say that since the tree protection bylaw has been put in place, there is a substantially greater amount of protection for trees, particularly not just those that are in natural heritage areas, which always had a fair bit of protection, but also those that are not yet through the planning application process, either for a site plan, subdivision, zoning amendment, and also just trees that are out there that are large trees. As has been pointed out, Londoners love their trees, and to see one next door, a large one, go down without an appropriate reason for that to happen really is something that I think this council has told us that they're not on for. So I think there's been a significant change, and it's certainly for a heightened level of protection for trees.
Thanks for reminding me the importance of this bylaw. And just wondering too if, I've heard Councillor Turner mention it from time to time about the assessment management plan of trees, if we as a city will ever sort of go into looking at trees as being an asset, and how we manage our assets can sort of be a different take on our bylaw.
So where we would start with that is municipally owned trees. So looking at our municipally owned trees as though they are infrastructure and assets, as they are. In fact, they're one of the few assets that grow in value as opposed to most which depreciate in value over time. So recognizing that, the way that we've been treating boulevard trees, for example, and the removal as requested by adjacent property owners is essentially charging the cost of removing the tree. And that is quite contrary to what we had proposed and we brought forward previously in a draft boulevard tree bylaw, to look at what is the value of the tree, the value of the asset that's being lost as well. And either in doing so, charge accordingly for the removal of the tree in a fee that could then be used for community tree planting, or alternatively maybe to act as a deterrent from the tree being cut down, and maybe alternatives to, for example, boulevard parking, which requires removal of a century tree.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quickly, I'm looking through the tree protection bylaw and I can't remember for the life of me. How this weaves in with respect to site plans for, and were all of these applications individual applications, or were they part of certain development applications on a larger scale?
So again, the Teeple Terrace is a little bit of an example of the community concern that the bylaw was intended to address, and that was that prior to an application for a site plan, for example, being completed and the opportunity for canopy protection or buffers or whatever the case may be being identified through that site plan process. So prior to that being possible, the trees were being removed in some cases. And so what the tree protection bylaw does is it says those trees must remain in place until the site plan is finalized and approval is obtained, unless they come through and get a permit for removal of the trees, and there would be conditions perhaps associated with that and a reason for why those trees need to be removed prior to the site plan approval process being completed.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I just could add to that, of course, the tree protection bylaw, just like all bylaws, are a very important aspect of the site plan approval process. Just this morning, though, I was speaking with Ms. Gillian Spence about looking at enhanced training for development services staff on these matters, which I think would be of great benefit to my staff as a whole.
I have one more piece relative to the question, and that is that the numbers that you see here, I believe, are outside the site plan approval process. So site plan approvals that take place wouldn't include these 400 roughly permits.
Thank you. That's kind of what I'm delving at a little bit, is if this is reflective of everything altogether, or if it's two separate processes, especially if that has some relation to the costs incurred. If a development application is a significant different animal than a property owner looking to trim a tree or two on their site, or they want to put a shed in or something like that. And is there opportunity in that process, in the development application process, to recover some of those costs associated with the application of the tree bylaw, rather than putting it on an individual resident?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's a good question. Mr. Fleming and I were just sort of quickly talking about it. Don't have a clear answer to that question, but it's definitely something to take a look at for future reviews.
I recognize this is a committee report to be received, and so I raised that just kind of as for consideration. I noticed there's 3 possible strategies. One of that might be to incorporate and take a look at. One is what level. I saw there's a good number of enforcement. 90% of enforcement calls were deemed to be non-infractions. Is there a way of triaging those in such a way that that on-site presence is significantly reduced, because only 10% of them actually have some I guess some measure of validity, so that you can significantly reduce many times you're on scene. Plus, are there revenue recovery opportunities that might be there? So those would be my recommendations. I'm not going to delve into the operations stuff, but I do thank you for bringing the report forward.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and recognizing that you're kind of pinch hitting. Hopefully these questions are going to be in your wheelhouse. So I found the report helpful. One thing that I think would make it even more useful is including some estimate of the asset value of the trees that have been removed and denied. Because the purpose of putting in the tree protection bylaw is really to protect the trees and their functions in the ecosystem. We're talking about using an appraisal system for valuing the trees and boulevards. I think we should use the same system. We were getting all the factors we need, I'm sure, when we were evaluating whether the tree can be removed or not. And just to give folks a sense, and I'm assuming that the greater than 50 centimeters and the greater than 75 centimeters are mutually exclusive, like so the 75 are in addition to the ones that are 50 centimeters. If all those 50 centimeter ones were sugar maples in pretty good condition, they're probably worth $560,000. Like $10,000 each if they're 50 centimeters or bigger. Like, it's not insignificant, right? And then for the 75 centimeters and larger, just the 11 that were denied, probably $266,000 for 11 trees, right? They're worth a fair amount of money. And I think when we think about the cost of administering the program, we have to keep in mind the value of the program on the other hand, right? And so I think we're going to get all the numbers for these trees. And I think understanding what's happening on a sort of financial side is really helpful, both on the cost side for us, but also on the benefits side for the city. So I just wanted to pass that on to our staff, and it looks like Mr. Fleming does have a response.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out that I think this is an important point that's been made by the councillor, but the number of trees that were, I'll put in air quotes, saved really isn't reflected here, or the trees that were potentially saved. And the reason I say that is because the bylaw being in place probably resulted in a lot of people not applying for tree removal or not removing a tree that they might have otherwise removed once they found out about the bylaw. And if they found out about the bylaw and understood that removal of this tree was going to be something that would require a permit process, and then they looked at the criteria relative to what trees would be approved for removal, there probably a lot that didn't come forward. So it's a little bit like speeding. You can't just look at how many tickets were issued as a reflection of how many people maintained the speed limit. The value of what was retained would go well beyond just those that were approved through the permitting process, but would also relate to those that weren't cut down because the bylaw's there.
Certainly, to the chair, I certainly recognize that. We can't count what we don't know about, though, so we'll count what we do know about. Also, similarly with the tree protection areas, you know, that's listed by number of applications. I would imagine that they vary in terms of the amount of trees in the area that we're talking about. Sometimes people want to cut down a lot of trees in a tree protection area. Sometimes they just want to cut down a couple. And for all I know, the 4 denials could have been a very large, significant grouping of trees that was worth a whole lot. I don't know that. I don't know what the scope of the permit applications, the 92 that were granted, what those were similarly. So I think having some way of expressing that would be helpful in the reporting, because when you look at it, you're like, geez, only 4 denials. Well, if that was like 10 hectares of trees, you know, I'm pretty happy with that. If it was, 10 trees total, you know, that might not be the kind of impact we were expecting from the tree protection area part of the tree protection bylaw. So that's my feedback. I'm glad to have the report.
Thanks very much, and with that, we can take a motion. Okay, and we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and item number 19 is a request for delegation status. The individual is not here this evening, so they are wanting to speak at the next committee meeting, so it's up to us today to decide if we will accept that delegation at the December 4th meeting or not. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one confused me a little bit because it times it against a report that is to come forward. So are we expecting a report updating of the waiving of development charges program?
Mr. Fleming has a really great answer for you. He told me all about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This particular site, just so that everybody's reminded, this site is right on Dundas Street. It's beside, very close to the new Fanshawe College revitalization project on Dundas. And there was a proposal for a residential tower there. The property owners have remained the same, but the proponent that initially was, that brought the application forward that this committee and council approved, that proponent has now dropped away from the development, but the property owners are moving forward or would like to. And what you're going to hear is just their perspective on the changes that we'll be bringing and how that might impact their model. And I think they're going to introduce a proposal for you to consider. So we've been working with them through the process, as has Development Services, to try to help them through the regulatory process associated with this. But they're just recognizing that the timing relative to the change in the proponent on this site has led them to a position where they're likely not able to get their application in before the proposed changes. And finally, just to remind you of what those proposed changes are, the ones that we'd really be talking about is where you need to pay your development charges up front, and then you get them rebated versus the current situation where your development charges just aren't paid. You don't have to pay them, and there's reserve funds that are drawn upon in order to pay for those development charges. And so they would like to talk to you about, just because of the timing associated with their proposal, whether there's any opportunity for them to be treated as an exception. I guess I have, but I don't want to speak for them, so I'd ask you not to take it verbatim, but that's a flavor, as you were saying, you're confused of what this was about. And the timing's important because the proposal that we're bringing forward should come into effect in January 2018, so they need to know whether there's an opportunity here or not for them before that occurs.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. That's helpful. I was wondering what report was coming forward, if that was the monitoring committee and all that. So really, they're just looking to come and talk to us, independent of any report coming forward. And looking, okay, I'm happy to grant status to come and talk to us.
Sure. We'll take a motion on that. Any further speakers? Okay. Seeing none, we'll call the question. Councillor Helmer?
Just to clarify, this is related to 150 Dundas only, and not some general report about financial incentives, right? The way the motion reads, it's kind of general.
That's correct, Madam Chair. It's just for that one property that they're going to be asking for you to consider an exception for.
Sure. We'll just delete the last bit of that sentence. There we go. Okay, moved and seconded. We'll call a question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and item number 20 is an added report from the Agricultural Advisory Committee. Councillor Turner and then Helmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad the Agricultural Advisory Committee had an opportunity to review our request. I think the interpretation kind of got lost in translation with it, it seems. We were kind of hoping for an opportunity to see some input on the, I guess ultimately the subparceling of land, agricultural lands outside the urban growth boundary. Instead, it probably came across to them as a request to say, hey, do you support this application or not? And so ultimately, I guess, I hope that we can try to take a look at this policy in general. It didn't quite come up with the intended output that I'd hoped when I referred it back to them, but I appreciate them having taken the time to review that.
That's helpful. Councillor Helmer, did you want to speak to that? No? Okay, we'll take a motion.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. So as you all know, this is our last meeting of the year and we've had a busy year. So I was going over what we've all done this earlier today. Tree planting strategy, urban agriculture strategy, the near campus neighborhood policies. We completed the music, entertainment, and culture district strategy. I could go on, but I think we all remember the secondary dwelling units issue that we dealt with a few times. We were quite successful with that. We've seen over 800 units being built in the downtown, or approved anyway in the downtown. And from the development services side, we've seen subdivision security policy revisions, shipping containers and trailer zoning implementation, industrial land use regulation, group home type 1 separation amendments, 6 public site plan meetings, that was something. 5 subdivision received, official plan zoning amendments, and a very active year for subdivision agreements, as we've seen with the current building report that we got today. So I want to thank everybody for all the hard work we've done this year. It's been great, and I know that we're being great hands with Councillor Turner coming in. He's been a great vice chair, and look forward to next year, as we're all staying here. Oh, great. And with that, we have 2 confidential items. We can stay in the room, so we'll take a 5-minute recess between here and there. All right, so if I could have a motion for recess, Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Helmer. All in favor? Hurrah, we'll see you back in this room in 5 minutes.